Andrew was driving on a half-empty highway, and the radio was playing his favorite jazz tune. His soul was singing for the second day. He couldn't wait to get home. Until 5 years ago, he had thought his life had ended on that fateful summer day when his wife and son had died in a terrible airplane crash. It was as if life had been divided into a before and after. Had it not been for his business, there is no telling what would have become of him. Only his life's work did not allow him to do something stupid and forced him to somehow continue to live on. But everything changed one day when he met Lisa. Many were incredulous, even after a year and a half, about their marriage. Lisa was 11 years younger, but Andrew didn't notice the difference at all. He was in love like a boy and insanely happy. The previous morning had been special for him. He was about to go to work when Lisa, smiling enigmatically, said, "Darling, can't you come back early? I have to go to the doctor." Andrew was genuinely scared for her, but his wife reassured him by informing him that they were expecting a baby and she just needed to get an ultrasound. From the first day of their marriage, Andrew dreamed of having a baby, and now the happy moment had finally arrived. For the sake of this, he was ready to postpone any meeting. He was persuaded, saying that the upcoming deal could be very important for their company. Although from the very beginning he was not in the mood to negotiate with those who had dark deeds behind their backs. Knowledgeable people told him that the prospective new partners had once had a criminal past, and in the gangster days had made money in obviously dishonest ways. The meeting was held in a branch of their firm in a neighboring city. This was the wish of the other party. Andrew decided to talk to them straight, so he didn't hesitate to tell them that he knew what they used to do. To his surprise, the so-called bandits turned out to be quite decent people, and frankly, admitting the former shenanigans, only laughed. They swore that they had long ago stopped doing it and assured him quite convincingly that they had gone to legal business without any problems with the law. Andrew thought to himself that people really can change, and the gangster days were already in the distant past. Negotiations went well, but were delayed due to some initially unclear points. Still, he decided not to call his wife, to surprise her. Arriving early immersed in his thoughts, Andrew did not even notice how the rain pounded on the car windows. At that moment, he noticed the figure of a woman on the side of the road and opened the door. "Hurry up and jump, you'll get soaked." "How far are you?" he shouted. The stranger was about his age. Well, maybe a couple of years younger. The travel companion was taciturn. Nevertheless, Andrew learned that her name was Gina, and she was a fortune teller, as she had told him. "So you work as a fortune teller just like that?" He laughed. Gina looked at him with what he thought was a challenge and said, "You don't believe me? We can check." Andrew suddenly stopped on the side of the road and, smiling, suggested, "Let's do it. I recently got married. My wife is young. I'm taking her to an ultrasound. We're expecting a baby. Here I want to know what awaits us. Maybe you can tell me who it's going to be before the examination." He went into his pocket and took out a small color photo of Lisa, which he carried with him since the day of their acquaintance. Holding it out to the fortune teller, he, smiling happily, added, "You have no idea. I already thought that I could never be happy. But when I met Lisa, I realized that life had just begun. Well, what do you say about it?" Andrew was surprised himself, but for some reason he wanted to share the most intimate things with this woman. When the fortune teller took the photo from Andrew's hands, her face changed immediately. He turned down the stereo, but didn't notice it. And then, giving him back the picture, Gina said in a quiet voice, "You know, let me tell your fortune another time. I think the weather must have given me a bad headache today. It's like a blur, I can't see anything." Andrew grinned incredulously. He turned up the music again and silently started the car. Gina realized that he didn't believe in her abilities, but she didn't know what to do. The thing was that exactly a couple of days ago, the woman who was in the picture came to her with a request to put a spell on her husband. From the first minutes, it was clear that any love for her husband was out of the question. She simply hated him. On Gina's words that she did not and does not engage in black magic. Guests went into a frenzy, threatened the fortune teller to seek the police and the tax authorities. "I'll still find a way to get rid of him, but it's only going to make things worse for you. I don't know how people even recommend you. Did you learn fortune telling in a pub?" Andrew hurried home, almost immediately forgetting about her. When he got to the house, he literally on wings flew inside. But Lisa was asleep, not even awakened by the sound of the door opening. Crouching on the edge of the bed, Andrew kissed her and quietly asked, "Lisa, aren't you ready? After all, I even rushed over earlier for this." House, without opening her eyes, through sleep unhappily said, "But what ultrasound? Not today. I feel very bad. Let's sleep some more, then we'll figure it out." Andrew, of course, was surprised, but writing everything off to the quirks of pregnant women, adjusted the blanket and went out. Only now he noticed that his wife's things were scattered in the living room, as in those days when she, having met with her friends, sat up until morning in the restaurant. This was very rare, mostly in the first year of their married life. Andrew had always been unhappy with such parties. He decided to wait for Lisa to get up and explain everything. She woke up around 3 in the morning. "Jenny," as if nothing had happened, stretching, "You're back already, and you said you wouldn't be home until tonight. So I wasn't expecting you." When Andrew tried to express his thoughts about the things scattered in the living room, suggesting that while he'd been away, Jenny had gone to see her friends again, she only laughed. "Oh, really? She waved her hand. "What friends?" "I was shopping yesterday looking for a loose-fitting dress. I'm going to need it soon. I'm so tired. I guess the baby's making itself known, so I barely had the strength to throw everything off and go to bed. So I slept through the night. I thought I'd have time to clean up before you got here." Andrew wanted to believe what his wife was saying, and he did. With a hug and a kiss, he asked, "Well, I hope you rescheduled the ultrasound appointment. When are we going to go? I'll be able to any time now. The negotiations are over. Just need to know ahead of time so I can plan everything." Lisa became strangely nervous somehow, and, pushing her husband's hand away, grudgingly said, "Well, why are you making a big deal out of this? I myself, if anything, will go, and you do your own business, not before me. It's not easy for me now. I'm sick every day, and my head hurts." Sessions of the next morning at breakfast, he asked quietly, "Sweetheart, how about I send a car for you today and meet you downtown? By the way, have you already registered somewhere? I've got a wonderful paid clinic near my office. We can get you in there today." Lisa jumped out of her chair and almost threw her husband's hand away. She shouted indignantly, "Oh, why do you keep patronizing me? I told you I don't feel well, and as soon as I can, I'll sign up. At least leave me alone and get on with your work." She went into the bedroom and slammed the door. Andrew was left sitting at the dining room table in bewilderment. Lately, he had often noticed that his wife was waiting for him to go to work, and she was acting strangely nervous in general. He took a sip of the cooled coffee and, immersed in his thoughts, went to the car. Andrew really hoped that before he returned from work his wife's mood would change, and they would be able to discuss everything calmly as before. In the evening, driving up to the house, he saw that the light in the bedroom was not on. But as soon as he turned off the engine, all the windows were dark. Looking into the bedroom, Andrew saw that Lisa's whole appearance showed that she had been asleep for a long time. In the morning, he got up earlier than usual, decided to surprise her. His wife had always said she loved his omelets. "That's fine, I'll surprise her. I'll make breakfast," he thought. Put it on the tray and quietly entered the bedroom. "Lisa, good morning, wake up." "I made breakfast," he said affectionately and bent down to kiss his wife. "I'm sick of these breakfasts. I don't want it and I won't eat it." Andrew hadn't expected this. Sitting down on the bed and without letting the trays out of his hands, he said, "What's wrong again? What's going on with us anyway? I feel like we're getting farther apart every day. What else do I need to do?" What happened next was something he had in no way expected. His wife abruptly sat up on the bed and began to shout indignantly. "While I'm pregnant, suffering from nausea, you travel ostensibly to negotiate, and you yourself are having fun surrounded by young girls. You expect me to believe that you spent 2 days talking business with future partners. Yes, I'm 200% sure that all this time you've been tumbling around in some hotel bed with your mistress." Andrew was literally at a loss for words. He had not expected that his wife had so much hatred for him. It seemed that she was ready to get right in his face. There's blood all over again. And that was for everything he'd done for her. Andrew was shocked, but still tried to justify himself. However, his spouse, without letting him get a word in edgewise, continued to pour mud. Seeing that it was impossible to stop her, Andrew put the tray on the nightstand, indignantly slammed the door and went outside. Resentment and pain from unfair accusations literally overflowed his soul. Deciding to calm down a little, he got behind the wheel and drove out of the gate. Only good jazz and a deserted highway could help him now. At least it seemed that way. His heart was pounding frantically. Tears welled up in his eyes. Not so long ago he had been infinitely happy, but now for the first time he saw such hatred in his wife's eyes that he didn't even know what to do next. Immersed in his thoughts, Andrew didn't even realize where the boy had come from. He sharply twisted the steering wheel to the side so as not to hit the kid and realized that he was flying into the ditch. The last thing he heard was the sound of breaking glass and a hard impact that knocked him unconscious. Andrew woke up in a hospital room. From the words of the doctor making rounds, he learned that he had multiple fractures and a concussion. "You'll live, my dove. Of course you will. You're lucky. But I doubt if you can walk." But nothing, his hands and adding, but nothing, people and in a wheelchair perfectly well lived for many years, getting joy from life. Moreover, you have a young, beautiful wife, which means you have someone to live for. She came to see you a couple of times. That same day, Lisa appeared in a wonderful mood and kissed her husband. "How are you, Andrushenka? You gave me a scare. I was very worried, but now everything will be fine." Really, Andrew really wanted to believe that, and he decided to get back to life as soon as possible. The same day, he asked to bring him a laptop, having warned the firm that in the near future he would manage everything remotely via video link. This idea was very unpleasant for the new partners he went to meet with. They immediately stated that they did not trust such remote management and demanded that their representative be taken into the company's staff to control, so to speak, on the spot. At first, Andrew tried to resist, but seeing nothing illegal in it, gave the command to formalize the new employee. He was sure that his deputy Ollie, who had been working since the first day in the company, would keep him informed and keep an eye on the newcomer. For the first week, everything went very well. Lisa often visited him and took care of him. At work, however, everything was a little more complicated. After all, controlling from a distance was really not so effective. And something went wrong. Everything seemed to be under control. People were working, everyone was doing their job. But after a couple of weeks, revenues started to plummet. They came to check on him and he just shrugged his shoulders at all the questions. "I don't know what's going on. Yes, everything seems to be working normally as usual, but the profits are getting lower every day. We have already had to delay the issuance of monthly bonuses. And if it goes on like this, soon we won't be able to pay salaries. People are slowly starting to revolt. Something has to be done." Andrew, immersed in his thoughts, listened to him and suddenly asked, "What about the guy the partner sent us? Maybe he's the one stirring the waters. It can't be because I'm sick that everything is falling apart like this." I somehow got worried, began to avert his eyes and was about to leave. He said, as if in passing, "Oh, come on, he's too young to be playing secret games in business." Ollie left. Andrew began to puzzle over the question of what could have brought down such a stable business so quickly. He didn't like the deputy's behavior either. Ollie was clearly not telling him the truth. He knew him too well, but that wasn't the last of it. What surprised Andrew that day? Almost immediately after Ollie, Lisa timidly walked through the door. Life talked about going to the doctors, her well-being, and then suddenly taking Andrew's hand in hers, heartfelt, began to sigh. "Honey, I met Ollie in the lobby. He told me all about the farm and I thought, oh, let's sign the company over to me while you're out of commission. I've got a college degree. I know most of your business. And Ollie will help if you need it." Andrew had expected anything but such an offer. He looked at his wife in surprise and asked, "And how do you envision that?" "You have a baby to think about, and I'll be fine, and I'm sure I'll think of something." Lisa immediately changed in the face and grudgingly fiddled, brightly painted lips indignantly declared, "Does this mean that you do not trust me, your wife? How and why then do we continue to live together?" He already knew that she often tried to get her way in this way. Trying to remedy the situation, Andrew drew her to him by the hand and kissed her. Quietly he whispers, "All right, I'll think about it." He hoped this crankiness was pregnancy-related and she would soon forget about it. At this point, Andrew had no idea how many people were going crazy, puzzling over how to take advantage of his illness and get their hands on the firm. As it turned out, Lisa was no exception. While he was thinking day and night away how to get the company out of the crisis, the newly minted partners with a gangster past-guarded Lisa at the hospital and offered to communicate, finding themselves at the table of a small cat. One of the so-called partners, who introduced himself as Eli, began to say in a sly voice, "Lizacha, you are a smart woman and should understand that your husband for a long time, most likely forever, will be tied to a wheelchair. The firm must be well managed. We need to develop it, and as we have recently been his partners, we're offering you a deal. You'll help make the company come into our hands, so to speak, and we'll offer you a monthly retainer for that service." He picked up a napkin that lay on the table and wrote an amount with a decent number of zeros. Lisa looked at the paper for a long time, as if weighing her decision, then laughed playfully and, looking at the men, quietly but firmly replied, "It is precisely because, as you say, I am a smart woman. I am able to run the company myself, and I intend to do so soon. I'd like you to be content with what you have so far. Otherwise, I might try, and then you'd lose even that." She stood up abruptly and grinned, adding, "Thanks for the coffee. It's disgusting here, by the way." The man, who had been sitting silently all this time, looked at her angrily, said abruptly, "You shouldn't do that. Soon you'll be biting your elbows." "What? Have you joined the war with us?" Lisa grinned, left, and exactly 10 minutes later Ollie came over to their table. "So did it work out?" Without saying hello, he asked. One of the men replied angrily, "No, that Hen said she was going to run the company herself. So that's how we need to get as much information as possible on this creep. Weaknesses, and what can we play on?" As he winked and immediately blurted out, as they say, for a fee, "I'll let you in on a secret. There'll be payment, insatiable. As soon as the farm is ours, you'll get this sum." He held out to Ollie the very napkin he had shown Lisa, and the latter, smiling contentedly, continued, "Our lady hasn't liked her spouse for a very long time, cheating on him with her former classmate almost from the first day of their wedding, and good for her. You can, if you want to." One of the men present uttered enthusiastically, and, taking a few bills out of his pocket, placed them on the table in front of Ollie. "So that by this evening I shall have all the information about this sweet couple. I have an acquaintance who will quickly take pictures like the third person in bed with him was Andrew." All the while, every minute, Andrew was thinking of ways to save the business. He demanded that the financiers double-check all the paperwork that had been done, that the lawyers double-check the contracts for possible errors. But the company's business never returned to its previous stable level. Every morning started with his computer and ended far past 00. Andrew sat at his computer monitor. One day, opening his mail, he quickly read the incoming emails, half of which were just plain spam. One letter, coming from an unknown address, had numerous photos attached. Without hesitation, Andrew began to open them one by one. And with each second, he ceased to understand whether it was a dream or reality. His beloved, seemingly loving wife was in all the pictures with a young and slender man. Somewhere they were kissing in her car, somewhere they were holding hands in a cafe. But most frightening to Andrew were the pictures of his wife half-naked in bed with this scoundrel. Closing his eyes, he leaned back in his chair and tears ran down his cheeks. He is a grown man, but he could not contain this flood of emotions and cried like a boy. Such a betrayal he had in no way expected. At that moment, even the affairs of the firm went to the background. His Lisa, still recently filled with love, in all the photos seemed so happy as he probably never saw her. Suddenly an epiphany came to him, and he immediately, gathering his wits, dialed Ollie's number. It was as if he'd caught on to the idea that it could all be a photo montage and decided to check it out. After all, who better than Ollie to keep abreast of all the events and intrigues? The thing is that his girlfriend worked for them as a manager and knew everything about everyone, including almost intimate details. Ollie arrived quite quickly, and as soon as he saw why his boss had called him in, he was very confused. He tried to avoid the subject at first, saying that he didn't know anything, but he behaved very insecurely. "Don't feel sorry for me. I can see you've been holding something back for a long time. I'm asking you, no, I'm ordering you to tell me everything you know." The next thing he heard was as if it were not with him. It seemed to him that he was immersed in a completely alien story of betrayal. The first time I saw Lisa was completely by accident, by myself, just a couple days after you and Andrew got married. I happened to be across town and saw Lisa and this guy coming out of a hotel, hugging like lovebirds. Then a cab pulled up, he kissed her on the lips, put her in the back seat and went somewhere in the direction of the mall. It turned out that most of the office already knew she was out, except for you. Andrew listened to Ollie in silence, and his mind was in chaos. Now he was no longer sure that the child his wife was carrying was his. Asking Ollie to leave him alone, he sank into his thoughts. Andrew remembered every day with Lisa and could not believe that all these years his wife was so brazenly protecting. That same day when his wife arrived closer to evening, Andrew said right from the doorstep, "I know all about you and your lover. Got a bunch of pictures from some well-wisher that testify to your passion. How could you? I loved you. I trusted you as myself, a child. So at least it's mine." Lisa was confused, but only for a few seconds. And then it seemed to Andrew that she even breathed a sigh of relief. Looking directly into his eyes, she, smiling impudently, began to say the words that just made his heart clench. "Who's to blame that you are such a fool? I never loved you at all. I just wanted to live like a white man in luxury and prosperity, not alone in the suburbs. I loved and love only one man, and I was hoping to get your firm and divorce you in a year. Well, if that's what's going to happen, maybe it's for the best. Just know, darling, I'm not going to let this go. Either you sign the house over or I'll get it through the courts. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, even if it's with you and a cripple. The other fool is suffering as if nothing had happened." She turned and went to leave the room, and at the door she grinned. And there was no child at all. "It's not like I'm sick in the head to ruin my figure in life." Andrew looked at Ollie and said, irritable, "By the way, I know you had your assistant Ollie over today. He's that thing right there. While you're going through the trouble here scared, he's going behind your back, leaking all the information to your competitors and helping your far from reliable partners." As the door closed behind Lisa, Andrew realized that his whole happy life was gone with her. He didn't feel like living, not just because he was wheelchair-bound or because of what he had heard about Ollie, but because he didn't know how to go on living or who he could trust. Since that terrible day, Andrew had been like a robot. Without thinking, he signed all the documents for the court, and his house immediately after the divorce went to Lisa, trying to solve any working moments. He couldn't get his act together at all, no matter how hard he tried to keep afloat. Soon, strangely enough, several of the contracts he had signed were failing at once. The company went under, and he was officially declared bankrupt. When it came time to be discharged from the hospital, it turned out that Andrew had nowhere to go. His best friend Ollie really, as it turned out, betrayed him and was now a deputy in the company of competitors. His ex-wife, no longer embarrassed, dragged his lover to their house and made it clear that Andrew shouldn't be there if he didn't want to get in trouble with the law. The only thing that made him happy was that he hadn't listened to her and sold his father's house, which was a few hours away from the city in a small village. That was where Andrew had decided to go. Getting back on his feet was beyond him. There was no business, and to start a new one he needed money and health, which he didn't have either. He was glad his wife had at least left him a rather expensive car. He contacted the dealership where he had once bought it. Andrew was surprised at how quickly, literally in a day, they helped him replace it with a cheaper one, suitable for driving in his current situation, and even paid him a good bit of the difference. He realized that the money wouldn't last long, but he could hold on for a while. By late afternoon, Andrew was on his way to his father's house. It had been many years since his father had died, and he had hardly ever been here. When he saw his future home, he panicked. There was only one name left of the fence. Almost all of it rotted away and piled up on the porch. The one-story hut stood with broken steps and a sagging roof. The cabin itself was small, with time-darkened walls and one of the 4 windows broken. Andrew couldn't imagine how he would, or if he would ever, be able to put it back in order. Immersed in his thoughts, he decided to take a ride to the river he remembered from his childhood, and with difficulty, shifting the wheels of the chair over the broken road, he drove into the evening twilight. Once on the shore, he began to look at the water surface, in which reflected just appeared the month, and thought about everything that had happened to him lately. Until now, Andrew could not believe that from a happy, successful businessman who was preparing to become a father recently, he had turned into a poor invalid, completely unprepared to live on. Indeed, at that moment he caught himself thinking that he didn't want to move on with his life, and suddenly decided that he wouldn't. Looking at the steep cliff just ahead, Andrew realized that he could stop all at once. As if not fully realizing the consequences, he slowly rolled towards the edge. When there were only a couple of centimeters left to the precipice, someone jerked the chair back sharply and quickly rolled it aside. Andrew turned around and, recognizing the woman, asked in surprise, "What are you doing here and why are you interfering? This is only my life and my decision. No tragedy, not even the worst, gives you the right to lynch me. Only God, who gave life, can take it away," the woman replied. Andrew calmed down a little and said sadly, "There is no point in living after what happened. By the way, how did you end up here and why exactly at this moment?" Regina, and it was her, squinted slyly and replied, "I told you I was a fortune teller. Now believe it or not, I dreamt of this village and you in that chair on the edge of a cliff. It was like something pushed me. I dropped everything and came here. It's the first time in my life I've ever seen everything, right down to the name of this place, so it wasn't hard to find." Andrew looked at her and realized that, strangely enough, he believed every word she said. They sat on the shore until midnight. He told her everything that had happened to him during that time, and Gina, in response, admitted that she knew about his wife even then, at their first meeting, but decided not to interfere. Now Andrew regretted it. After all, if she had told him then, maybe none of this would have happened to him. "You must be tired by now," she said, looking at him. "Let me give you a hand. Where are you staying?" Looking at her with sad eyes, Andrew said, "Thank goodness I didn't sell the house left by my father. I just don't know if I can live in it. I'll definitely have to sleep in the car tonight." Gina gripped the handles of the wheelchair and said quietly, "There are no unsolvable situations in life. Everything will be fine." Andrew looked at Gina gratefully, and she rolled the wheelchair in the direction he was pointing as they approached the house. "Is there room for me in your car?" she asked with a sudden smile. "I can't leave you in a hut like this." She had really decided for herself, while still unsure, that she would stay with Andrew, at least for the near future. She couldn't and wouldn't leave him alone in this state, much less feel guilty about it. They spent the night in the car. Andrew reclined in the driver's seat, and she lay in the back seat. In the morning, Gina made a quick trip to the village store, and they had breakfast with the loaf of bread and milk she had brought. "Thank you so much for coming. But I guess it's time for you to go now," Andrew said with sadness in his voice. Gina turned around, and there was so much warmth in her eyes that he wanted to snuggle up to her and never let go. She smiled and said, "How could I leave you in these conditions? Since I saved you from doing something rash yesterday, I should help you settle in, maybe only for a couple hours. I'll be gone by tonight. You know the customers will be offended. I haven't warned anyone, and people come from far and wide to see me. I'll tell my neighbor if you don't mind your address, and if anyone really needs it, let them look for me here." Andrew was glad. He was willing to do anything to avoid being alone with his heavy thoughts. He smiled back at her and so, "Well then, let's switch to you since we have such hard work ahead of us in settling this hut." They were quickly able to remove the startling lock on the front door, and once inside, they saw that it wasn't so bad. The two small rooms, the porch, and the kitchen were as if untouched by time. If it weren't for the cobwebs and a thick layer of dust, you'd think the owner had just recently left. In one room, which looked like a bedroom, there was a large iron bed, neatly made with a coverlet. Like across from it was a quite sturdy oak closet. And by the bedside there was an equally good quality nightstand with a small lamp, beside which lay an open book, as if it had just been read. The second room was like a living room or a dining room. A large round table covered with a velvet tablecloth stood right in the middle. There were a few chairs around it, and a glass cabinet with dishes against the wall, with a small television on top of it. Andrew looked at it all, and tears came to his eyes. He remembered well how, as a child, he had loved it when guests came to the house and his mother would happily pull beautiful dishes from this cupboard. And the rest of the time, they used the simple assorted plates that were stored in the kitchen in a makeshift nightstand. Gina's voice came from the kitchen, interrupting his recollection. "Well, Andrew, it's not as bad as I first thought. It's quite a place to live. Pots, pans, dishes. And guess what? Even the pasta in the glass jar is still there. I don't know if I can eat it. After all, you said it's been years since your father died. I'll go to the neighbors now. I'll ask who would do the gas, where to find a handyman, and how much it would cost to fix the porch. And the windows should be replaced, and then we can get settled in." Andrew was so inspired by her plans that he almost said he'd fix it himself, but then, looking at his feet, he just clenched his fists. But something seemed to overpower his thoughts. Gina said, "You'll get up. I'll help you with that. But for now, let's leave it to the local craftsman to fix the house." She left and returned a half hour later with an elderly man carrying a box of tools. In the morning, a neighbor who introduced himself as Stephen came to Andrew's house. In a gruff voice, he said loudly, "But where's our new neighbor?" and held out his hand to Andrew and continued. "Gina already told me that you came to my late father's house to live. Unfortunately, I didn't see him anymore. My wife and I only moved here a couple years ago, but as they say, we'll get to know each other. I'll fix it up for you in no time. I used to build houses like this myself. We can handle the gas too. I'm sorry I've had a drink tonight, but I'll bring it back tomorrow." Stephen was really very handy with everything. He replaced the broken window with brand new glass, fixed the porch and made the steps into a gentle slope, and he even managed to pull the broken wire from the electric pole and flick the switch proudly. Gina was scrubbing, wiping, and constantly calling Andrew for help. It was as if she was finding work for him on purpose, trying not to leave him alone, and he was grateful for it. By evening, the house was unrecognizable. It became warm and cozy at once. Having done all the work, Stephen categorically refused to give Andrew the money, and smiling good-naturedly, "Let me do it neighborly. If you need anything, please contact me. I will help you in any way I can. Now let's go to our place. My wife said she won't let us in without you, and you don't have anything to cook with. My Ellie makes a great borscht, and she'll make pies. She's originally from Clayton." Gina and Andrew tried to refuse, but the neighbor insisted, and they finally agreed, which, of course, they didn't regret later. The evening turned out to be very heartwarming and warm. Stephen's wife was a very hospitable and sociable woman. They said goodbye as good old friends. In the morning, Gina was going to go home to settle things and get the necessary things. Andrew offered to drive her, but she smiled and said, "It's only a short drive. I'll be back in no time. You better go with Stephen to get gas." When she returned, Andrew was already cooking something in the small kitchen, where his wheelchair could hardly turn around. Gina laughed. It turns out that businessmen don't just eat in restaurants, they can cook too. Andrew turned around and was embarrassed like a boy. "I haven't cooked in ages. All I could do was boil potatoes and fry chicken. As they say, even a fool can cook chicken. That's what Stephen and I bought on the way over. We'll have dinner in about 10 minutes. At the table, they discussed the plans for the near future, primarily concerning Andrew's recovery. From the next morning, Gina began to give him massages, helped him with the exercises prescribed by the doctors. In addition, she was able to help a woman in the village, and even neighboring villages began to come to her one by one, each one with a different problem. Andrew did not know what she did or said, but he realized that she helped many people. When Gina had visitors, he would go outside and sit on the porch, respecting her unusual work. One day, he was sitting there, thinking about something of his own. Suddenly, a quiet child's voice sounded very close. "Uncle, can your wife cure my ass?" Almost immediately, a red-haired boy of about 6 years old appeared from somewhere over his shoulder. His face was dirty, and his sickly thinness said that he had seldom eaten enough. Andrew held out his hand and said, "Well, let's start by introducing ourselves. I'm Andrew, what's your name? And why is your mother, because of your father, does not go to bother?" The boy, taking a serious look, shook his hand and said his name was Danny, and his mom died when he was very young. Daddy kept working for a while after she died. Then when he started drinking, they fired him. Now he's got to make do with odd jobs, he said, which was very rare when his father was sober. "We no longer have any relatives. That's how I live with my dad," Danny summarized sadly, and added, "Don't think he's nice. It's just the neighbor Aunt Dinah said that if I'm not taken to the orphanage, they'll give our house away. The local farmer's already had his eye on it twice. He's sure to take it away." Instantly, the little boy was ready to cry, but Andrew put his arm around his shoulders and said, conspiratorial, "Let me try to talk to your daddy myself." Andrew hoped that Danny lived nearby. Stephen's house was on the same street, only closer to the lake. Andrew didn't pay much attention to what the runaway farmer said at first, but he was ready to believe it. The place turned out to be very picturesque. The hope that Danny's stepfather would listen to him was gone from the first second. The so-called father sat there, immersed in dark thoughts, and periodically took sips of bitter and strong liquor with his dirty fist straight from his throat. All attempts to talk sense into the alcoholic caused only aggression and insults. Realizing that the conversation would not work, Andrew turned to the frightened child. "Let's do this. You go to us, and tomorrow morning my wife Jen and I will try to help." The boy nodded silently and they headed back out. When Andrew saw Gina looking out of the wicket gate, he, driving up, said, "Do you mind if we have a visitor tonight?" "He came to see you, actually. But as your assistant, I tried to solve the problem earlier. Alas, I'm a long way from you. I'll explain it all later. I hope you can help." That evening, they fed the boy and put him to bed. And when the child fell asleep, they whispered in the kitchen for a long time. Andrew detailed everything he had learned about Danny and his communication with his father. Gina sighed and, taking his hand, said quietly, "Don't. Every other woman has these problems, and I've saved more than one marriage by pulling their husbands out of the clutches of addiction. Tomorrow I'll go to this daddy early in the morning before he has a chance to drink again." Andrew offered his help, explaining that there was no telling what to expect from such a man. But Gina, as always, smiled good-naturedly and said calmly, "Oh, Andrew, I've treated a lot of people like that, but no one has ever dared to raise a hand. Just please leave Danny with us. Wait for me. Everything will be all right." As she was leaving that morning, Andrew decided to go there quietly, waiting for the time to pass. But at the very door, Gina turned around and said, affectionately, "Andrew, don't forget. I feel and see everything. Believe me, you'll only ruin everything." He pretended to agree, but realized he couldn't leave her alone with that monster. After biding his time, he followed, deciding to watch what was going on not far from Stephen's house. Danny's father did look better in the morning than he had the night before. Andrew couldn't hear what Gina was saying to him, but when she handed him a vial of something, he drank it immediately without even a wince. Suddenly, the chair Andrew was sitting in was sharply turned around, and a stranger in an expensive tracksuit hissed, "Man, who are you? Or what are you doing here?" "I think I've guessed. You are that colleague who settled in the suburbs with a fortune teller. What are you guys doing here? This is my territory, and the house will soon be mine, so I won't see you here again." Andrew was somehow sure that this was the farmer who had decided to deprive Stephen of his home. His last words were also heard by Gina, who approached. "What makes you think you can call the shots around here? This is Danny's house, his dad's house. And I really hope it stays that way," she said sharply. Andrew, looking straight into the stranger's eyes, added, "You better not show up here again. Danny's father's quit drinking and got his mind right, so you're not going to do much good here, and we'll try to make sure you do." Gina silently grabbed the stroller and was about to head for home when she stopped and said, "By the way, if anything happens to them, I can prove who caused it. You think about it, I'm a fortune teller after all, and I can see a lot of things." Andrew immediately realized that from that day on, they had made an enemy of the farmer, but decided that the problem could be solved. The next morning, he and Gina went to check on Danny and were surprised to find his father Stephen sober. Smoothly shaven, he was tidying up the house. Thanked them for their help and, over tea, began to say guiltily, "I am Danny, actually, not a native, so to speak, stepfather. I loved his mother very much, so I got married when the boy was only 3 months old. I don't even know who his real father is. Don't tell him anything. He's really become like family to me. I swear on my memory. I won't spend it on anything else. I'll put the house in order." They left with a light heart, trusting Stephen, and for an empty, so to speak, effect, they asked for one more day to invite to the table, promising to take a walk in the morning to check on him. But the next day, an unpleasant surprise awaited them when they arrived at the house. Neither Stephen nor Danny was there. Everything the owner had diligently cleaned up yesterday had been turned over. Seeing a woman timidly entering the wicket through the window, Gina ran outside. "Hello, I recognized you. You live nearby. What happened here? Can you tell me?" Women sobbed and said that in the evening some bandits in expensive cars showed up at Stephen's house and demanded that he give up the house. It was hot, and through the open windows she could see that there were 3 of them, and they had a long fight with Stephen. He absolutely refused to sign anything. He was screaming that he was going to call the police, but I decided to do it myself, the neighbor said once again. And while I was running to them, I didn't have a phone. When I came back, there were no cars, no Stephen. Only Danny was sitting on the porch crying. The cops didn't even listen. Our farmer had bribed them all. They just said he must have gotten drunk and gone into the woods again. They'd already taken Danny away, said they'd send him to a shelter. Nobody ever saw Stephen again. Somebody said the bandits the farmer sent had killed him and buried him. Some said he'd chased them and drowned in the swamp. Andrew decided by all means to adopt Danny, and with the help of Gina, collected the necessary documents. But he has already been rejected twice. Each time the main reasons given were his disability and lack of family, but he continued to believe that everything would work out. And again he applied to all the authorities. Finally one day, Gina joyfully entered the house, waving an envelope. "Andrew, dance," she almost shouted. "It's true what they say, water sharpens stone. We've been approved for adoption. Let's go." Tears came to Andrew's eyes, and he twirled joyfully in place, mimicking the dance. That day was the first time they felt like happy parents. And when they put Danny to bed, Andrew, taking Gina's hand, said, "Yes, I realize I'm not much of a groom now, but maybe I still have at least a tiny chance that you will become my wife." Gina smiled and kissed him gently on the lips. "You are a very kind, sweet, charming fiancé," she said quietly. "And, of course, I would love to be your wife." With the arrival of Danny in their home, Andrew seemed to perk up. He began to ask Gina to study with him as often as possible. And after a month, he could hardly take a step, leaning on the hand of his beloved. During this time, Danny was somehow sold by a farmer. And what was Andrew's surprise when he found out that his former companions had bought him out, remembering his criminal past. They managed to pull off a deal that left the farmer with a pittance. When Andrew found out about it, he offered to help him. He told him where to go and what to do. And the former partners, without even realizing whose handiwork it was, soon all together were behind bars. After the trial, the farmer himself came to Andrew and thanked him for his help, apologized for what he had done, and admitted that he was not to blame for the death of Danny's father. "My boys told me," he said frankly, "that it was the fool who fell into the swamp while chasing them, so much so that there was no way to get him out. I'm sorry, I didn't think this house thing would end this way. I've got it back in court, so I'll sign it back over to Danny tomorrow. I'm sorry again, and tell Ollie I'm sorry." He's gone. He and Gina had a long talk about what had happened. The farmer kept his word and the house was returned to the boy, but the happy family stayed where Gina and Andrew lived. Soon they signed without any hype, inviting only Stephen and his wife. And a few months later, Gina informed her husband that she was expecting a baby boy. Danny was most excited about the news. He shouted excitedly, "I'm going to have a little brother or sister. I can have a little brother and a little sister." In response, Gina squinted her eyes, looked at her husband, and said, "And he saw. They took almost all my things, that we were going to have a very big and friendly family, and our daddy would be just as great as before." Andrew, for the first time in a while, wanted to live madly and began to think for days on end about the new business. One day, Gina returned from shopping and found the guests at the gate. There was an expensive car, and in the house sat two men dressed in strict suits. "Gina, get acquainted. These are my old, good comrades. My ex didn't give them my address. They've had a hard time finding me, and they're offering me a new case. What's your gut feeling?" He smiled, hugged his wife, and happily said, "I won't start anything without your blessing. You know and see everything in advance." Gina jokingly waved away and smiled and said, "Oh, come on. You should at least feed the people from the road. There's a whole pan of cutlets in the fridge." Side the business, offered by friends, turned out to be quite unprofitable, and the newly opened business went uphill, bringing good profits to the owners. Andrew could already move quite safely, slightly limping on one leg, but the doctor said it was only a matter of time. Just together with Gina and Danny in the evenings, they picked out a large house that Andrew really wanted to buy for the family. To Gina's words that they could live in it too, he replied, "With your prophetic dream of a big family, we'd be sitting on each other's heads. And by status, I now, as a successful businessman, should have a beautiful wife, a happy family, and a large house. I have everything but a house, and I have to fix it." One of these evenings, someone knocked timidly on the window, then another and another. Gina went to see what the late visitor was, and just as she opened the door, started calling for Andrew. Right on the porch was a large basket with two babies lying closely together. For a few minutes, they both stared at this gift in confusion. Then Andrew, picking them up, carried the babies into the house. At the very bottom, under a blanket, They found a note where Andrew's ex-wife wrote that heaven's punishment had caught up with her and she had gotten pregnant by playing around. But her lover, after taking all the money out of her, dumped her and left her for someone else. Informed that the babies' names were Donna and Patty, she asked them not to look for her and to raise decent people. Andrew and Gina sat across from each other, holding the babies and smiling confusedly. Andrew was the first to speak. "You know, I don't even doubt your abilities anymore, but I didn't expect your dreams to come true so quickly." Gina kissed the baby in her arms and happily replied, "Yes, Andrew, I didn't expect it myself, but now we have to find something to feed the couple." Gina took care of the children. Stephen's wife was a big help, but that was until Andrew bought the house. As soon as they moved in, he began to see that it was hard for Gina to cope with so many kids and household chores. By then, Gina had a son, and even with the other three a little older, it was very difficult to manage all this kindergarten. Realizing that his wife, who loves children so much, would never even think of having a nanny, he decided to hire a housekeeper. As if hearing his thoughts, one day at the door of the supermarket, he literally ran into a woman dressed in some rags, but very much like someone. After literally standing there for a second in confusion, he realized it was Lisa, his ex-wife. Approaching and realizing that he was not mistaken, he offered to sit in the nearest cafe. Lisa was no longer the well-groomed and blooming woman she was with him, but like a cornered animal. She told him how she was struggling with temporary earnings and was constantly looking for work. At this point, Andrew had an epiphany, and he suddenly asked, "Say, can you work in my family as a housekeeper? Only God forbid you even hint to the children that you are their mother, the twins and Gina they idolize. And they can't know about any other mom. I'll give you a place to stay. We have a guest house on the grounds, and of course, the meals are on us. I'll also pay good money to relieve Gina of her main domestic duties." Anyway, Andrew asked Lisa to be his house widow with many children sheltered astray on a frosty night. Then one day she came home early and froze when she saw ... MP4. Amanda was tidying up the mezzanine, almost through tears. Every single thing she picked up had something to do with it. Old shoes, carefully filled with copies of newspapers and packed still in their native boxes. Folded in 3 legs artificial Christmas tree. A box, sabers, wicked garlands used to still manage to shine in the hands of her husband. A cardboard treasure trove of Christmas tree toys, ski equipment. She froze for a second. Traitorous tears protruded in her gray eyes, unwilling to dry. The children must not see her longing and hopelessness. Away with the sadness. We must pull ourselves together. Her mother's anguished voice came to mind. "Amanda, don't hang around all that junk. The top storeroom is a bunch of junk. I'll be sure to get there and throw everything in the bin." I didn't get there. I didn't throw it out. I didn't have time. Not only that, about Amanda's father, the harmful neighbor Chloe liked to joke that she was born of a passing young man, but also her mother burned in a week. The doctor's verdict sounded dire. A worsening ulcer. Too late. You, my dear, came to us. Massive internal bleeding. We couldn't do anything even on the operating table. There was no time. The surgeon in blue uniform cast a pitying glance at the girl huddled on the couch near the operating theater and hurried away into the labyrinth of the hospital corridor. Amanda was left a complete orphan. She had no one in the world now. Yes, her mom complained of occasional stomach pains, but that this would be a death sentence was a shock to Amanda. A fierce, formidable, so combative woman. She seemed to show her power to everyone around her. Healthy, her daughter was pulling her own hump until she was 20. Almost brought her up and taught her. In the yard of their old 5-story building, she managed to keep order. First as the best in the whole neighborhood janitor, then in the role of manager, head of housekeeping. So in all hypostasis, she proved herself that all superiors were always calm in this house. Neither tenants nor electricians nor plumbers are not amused. Joyce will bring them all to their senses in no time. They'll be walking like silk. Mother was a self-taught intellectual with a high school education. She spent all her spare time reading books. The library in the neighboring house diligently sowed reasonable, good, eternal in the masses. She wrote and expressed her thoughts competently. In life, you cannot say that from the janitors appointed by the chief of the yard was inept. Household needs knew by heart. The entire large team of housekeeping on her literally prayed. She got a 2-room flat at the place of her work only 5 years ago. Before that, she lived in a servant's room for janitors with her daughter. And when a lonely old woman died on the ground floor, she was given a flat for her many years of endeavor. Now Amanda got the flat. The girl finished school well, easily entered the Pedagogical Institute, dreamed of teaching children Russian language and literature. When Joyce died, she had just finished her 4th year. Ahead of her was an internship at the school, and then the defense of her diploma. The only thing she didn't know was what to live on now. How was her mom going to make ends meet on her small salary? And she also dressed her daughter decently. It was a mystery to Amanda. The stash in the bookcase of the metal sesame box ran out almost immediately. At least the tenants contributed to the funeral expenses. The rest was taken care of by the communal workers. After sitting for a month on cereals, pasta, potatoes, and tea and sugar, as Joyce always used to stockpile food from her salary, Amanda realized that she needed to find a job. She wouldn't last long without a new injection of cash. In a month's time, she would be starting her 6-month teaching internship. That meant she would only be able to work in the evenings. How not to remember where many successful businessmen and film stars started their careers? The answer lay on the surface: a waiter in some cafe or bar. A suitable place was found surprisingly quickly in the beer bar favorite, making money on broadcasting sporting events with beer drinks and light snacks. The waitress had just quit. The perky, fast-talking girl had run out of patience. And all because of the fact that the audience in the hall, with a huge TV set on the whole wall, showed emotions in a peculiar way about scored goals or missed goals. In a burst of joy, some red-haired guy would pour the rest of his beer directly into a round hole in the center of the table and float a small coin in it. Another would roughly kick a waitress passing by a table with a full tray. A third one would push the table, jump up angrily, and start walking in circles around other tables, not allowing the employee with the next portions of foamy drink to move freely around the hall. The manager of the establishment saw this disturbance, but their bar was on the outskirts of the city. Its contingent was made up of local laborers. They did not seriously damage the property. They would make some noise and then go home peacefully. Even fights happened only a couple of times and ended in the beginning with a couple of slaps without serious damage. Amanda was told about the vacancy in the bar favorite by her neighbor Chloe, who knew all the news in the district before the district police and grandmothers at the entrance. She caught the girl in the entrance and snidely whispered in her ear, "Amanda, I thought you were looking for a job, not Dusty." "Well, I got you a job, Sebastian. You know his bar, the favorite? He's got Jenny, who's off shift today. Go and have a chat with him. He's a nice bloke. He won't hurt you." Sebastian greeted Amanda with the clinking of glass beer mugs. There was muffled whispering in the huge place, as the dishwasher and the cleaning lady talked to each other. The latter had just scrubbed the floor to a perfect shine, but curiosity got the better of her. Where did Sebastian go? Does he think that an hour before opening he'll find some idiot from the street to take the place of a waitress? Only nobody wants to put up with this drunken crowd. I told him to take my apprentice as a waitress, but he said no. He said she was old. Where have you seen a woman at 47 years old being written off? Let her suffer now without a waitress. Eva also joined the conversation. "Oh, you're right. I offered him my sister Jacqueline as a waitress, and she's only 40. But he refuses. He only wants a younger girl for our hot guy customers, so that she makes their blood boil, as if they were waitresses." Was that a good thing? She was always carrying those mugs around with a sour face. She's got a husband at home, so why make eyes at someone else? Behind the wall, 2 young guys were nimbly taking pizza dough out of cardboard boxes, then pushing them into a large oven. Sebastian's new acquisition and pride is a special pizza oven. The purchased dough bases were smeared with mayonnaise, and then toppings were placed on them, either with sausage, or with fish, or simply with grated cheese. Jacqueline and 2 of her fellow students worked at the favorite bar. They were on an apprenticeship from culinary school. Sebastian didn't have a big kitchen. For hot meals, pizza from the oven at most. For snacks, an endless amount of pre-packaged snacks and industrial products: dried smoked fish, chips, dried calamari, spiced nuts, cheeses, sliced smoked sausage for toast and breadcrumbs with salt and pepper. It's impossible to list everything. The bar didn't bother with plates, forks, spoons. The customers included all the disposable plastic utensils they used in the bill. Another thing, beer mugs. There was a whole collection on the shelf above the bar. The owner brought this glass from different cities where he visited. The refined versions were for VIP clients, brought from Prague and Munich. The rest, more simple, bought in souvenir shops. It was in such an environment that Sebastian met Amanda for the first time. In the beer bar for sports fans, there was not yet a single bartender out of the 3 bartenders working here. They will be here by the beginning of the shift. After all, bartenders are the elite of the staff environment. The girl climbed the stairs, pushed the door open with determination and froze, adjusting her eyes to the semi-darkness in the huge room. All those present turned their heads towards the open doorway, like statues. In front of them stood a young girl of medium height, a fine figure, an inquisitive look of dark gray eyes, a russet fluffy ponytail of hair carelessly gathered, a little pulled down because of a bright hairpin. Light summer jeans, a t-shirt with an intricate print, light white trainers on her feet. That's pretty much the whole portrait of the stranger. "Good afternoon," Amanda said in a ringing voice. "Can I see Sebastian?" "What do you need him for?" Eve answered cheerfully. "He's not here now. He's away on business. And I'm in no hurry. For me, it's either work or he's gone." Amanda grinned. "How so?" The women were as curious as magpies. "If I don't get a job here, tomorrow I'll go to the world with a bag," Amanda explained calmly. And there was so much bitterness in her words that Eva and her companion forgot all the barbs, choked and stared at the girl in expectation of confession. And Jenny and the boys pulled themselves up, all craning their necks to hear better. "I'm not going to tell you much, my dears," Amanda continued. "I became a final orphan a little over a month ago, a student of pedagogical university. I have to go to practice in the mornings, and my scholarship is only to pay the rent and buy bread and milk, nothing more. I live 2 blocks away. If your boss hires me, I'll try not to let anyone down." At the sound of the door opening again, all heads turned simultaneously. Sebastian himself squeezed into the place, again with a cardboard box in his hands. "Sebastian, did you bring new glasses and mugs again?" Eva called out to him in a friendly manner. They had known each other for years. Once in their youth, Eva had been behind the counter in his first beer bar since the Soviet times. Then she'd given up, grown old. But she didn't want to part with her Sebastian. So they followed the boss from bar to bar, until they organized everything here from scratch, having taken over the old diner from the negligent owners. Eva scrubbed and dusted every inch of the hall on her elbows and knees. Everything around shone with cleanliness and newness. Immediately after the opening, people started to come to the favorite. A penny dripped into the cash register. Her kind Sebastian blossomed and fussed. "Come in, Chief," this time his faithful assistant said. "While you were traveling, we found a new waitress. Intelligent, not like me, but a good girl. We've already interviewed her. She's a good fit, so we're going to take her on tonight and test her out. And we'll see what's what. Let's get Jenny and Jenny working four-handed." And so began Amanda's first day of work, which determined her future. By the beginning of her pedagogical practice, Amanda had already mastered the favorite bar so well that the rest of the staff thought they had seen this noisy, always dissatisfied young lady. As if such an unpleasant girl had never worked in their home-like friendly team. Discipline suddenly settled down in the hall. The regulars didn't turn on the pretty Amanda with bad antics at all. And if someone tried to get handsy at first, the others looked at him in such a way that he felt sick. Sebastian only hummed approvingly. Eva soon gave her summary. "Amanda's a smart one. Men can tell from a mile away that you can't lose with her. She's not rude, she doesn't sling mud, and she's not sticky. She works hard and takes care of her clients." 6 months flew by. Amanda fully mastered in the bar, deftly carried in her hands at the same time 4-liter mugs of foamy nectar. At the same time, she never familiarized herself with the guests of the establishment, clearly keeping them at a safe distance. The New Year holidays flew by like a comet across the starry sky. The year 2014 had arrived. By the beginning of February, Amanda had completed her teaching practice reports. 2 state exams were behind her, and she was admitted to the dean's office to write and then to defend her diploma. Everyone was looking forward to the Winter Olympics in Athens. The country had won the right to welcome athletes from all continents. The most avid fans bought tickets for matches and competitions in advance. Regular visitors of the favorite were looking forward to cheering for our country here in the bar. In the atmosphere of general jubilation, they shifted mugs with beer when our team will stand on the highest step of the podium, or will be sad if they give up the championship to faster and more agile, and maybe more fortunate rivals. It was impossible to watch the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games at the stadium in February 2014 without a lot of emotions and a lot of libations. Beer was flowing. Passions were running high. When the American Olympic team appeared on the platform to the track of a famous band, everyone at the tables in the bar jumped up with jubilant shouts. It seemed that no one could stay at home that night. The favorite was packed. Amanda could barely keep up with taking orders and running from the bar to the customers. At the peak of the noise and clamor, the door of the bar opened and a new, unfamiliar to the old-timers company poured in from the cold. The young, athletic-looking guys piled into the center of the bar, where a few bar stools were still empty. Amanda breathed a sigh of relief that at least their agile bartender could handle these guys on his own, and fixed a strand of her blonde hair out of the ponytail that was secured on the top of her head with a colored knitted elastic band. Eve appeared from the back room and whispered trustingly, "If I make it through tonight until the favorite closes, consider me an Olympic gold medalist too. I'm exhausted." The old cleaning lady winked at her conspiratorially. "And look at the newcomers, they don't look like neighborhood natives at all. One is more beautiful than the other." I remembered a phrase from my favorite film, "Where did such a handsome man come from?" Eva laughed and Amanda turned round to look at the handsome strangers. Her attention was immediately drawn to one of the sturdy, trim guys. He was slowly sipping beer from a tall glass with a colorful emblem on the side and watching the action on the big TV screen. Even from a distance, it was obvious that he had dark brown eyes, almost like two glowing coals, and a short cut of dark, almost black hair. Good, Amanda thought to herself. I've forgotten when I ever paid attention to the male gender, and I'm only turning 21 in a couple of months. With my studies and my daily waitressing job at Sebastian's, I'm going to turn into an old maid or a blue stocking without a single sign of femininity so soon. As if overhearing her thoughts, the guy suddenly turned round and looked straight at her. Without averting his gaze for a few seconds, he smiled warmly, and only then replied to the guy sitting next to him. Since the car stalled, they took it to a service station. God told us to watch the Olympic opening ceremony here. "Okay, Kevin, whatever you say," he replied. "At least I got some warmth while we waited for the tow truck. I was freezing to death." They talked some more quietly and then ordered more beer. The evening was drawing to a close, and Amanda's shift was coming to an end. It hadn't been easy, but the opening of the Athens Olympics had been worth it. Everyone was in high spirits. Amanda had forgotten all about the guy who had caught her eye for a while, but somewhere in the heavens, fate had decided otherwise. When the Athens Olympic skiing competition fell on the schedule, he showed up at their bar, the favorite, but this time alone, without his mates, taking the far table in the corner. Gesturing for her to come over, he ordered a mug of non-alcoholic beer and a plate of peanuts, croutons, and squid rings. He kept his eyes on the screen while the skiing competition was on, and as he left, he suddenly asked Amanda a question. "What time do you get off work, Amanda?" Her name was on her jacket. "I'd like to walk you out, if you don't mind." "I don't mind." The waitress, who was already quite tired at the end of the day, looked embarrassed. Now she didn't care whether she had a decent appearance for socializing with a handsome man. She was surprised that the man she had turned her feminine attention to was the one who had returned to the favorite bar. "Your shift will be over in 40 minutes, Amanda said. "I'll be waiting for you in the car out front. Take it easy and get your work done. I'm in no hurry." They drove the 2 blocks to her house in a minute. The streets were deserted at night. Only rare streetlights and the moon in the sky slightly illuminated the even rows of brick 5-story buildings and the bench at the entrance. They were silent, as if they had water in their mouths. The guy only said deftly when he opened the car door for her. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. "I'm Kevin. I'm a ski coach. I'm supposed to be in Athens right now if it weren't for the Olympics. I'm still watching my favorite events on TV. My charges are small. Their victories are still ahead of them." We reached the flat, where Kevin had volunteered to escort her, in complete silence, like gorillas in the forest before an important mission. "I'm not asking for coffee," the man said, "although I would like a cup of this invigorating drink." "Why not?" Amanda agreed easily, having had enough of the loneliness of returning to the warmth of home after work, with only the old refrigerator humming quietly at its epicenter. And then an equally ancient television switched on for company, and no one has been home for months. They entered the flat at the same time, bodies colliding on the threshold. Amanda had read in some novel before that there was such passion when sparks flew between a man and a woman. Now she saw the process in real life, and she even felt like she was electrocuted at the touch. "Amanda, let's switch to you," she heard Kevin's voice through the cotton wool in her ears and nodded in response. "Is that a Chinese god?" Kevin asked, pointing to a statue of some Asian goddess Joyce had given him a long time ago, and it was on the dresser. "I'm going to put the kettle on in the kitchen," he said. "I'm sorry, I'm just doing the housework. You're not looking so good. You're so tired after all that running around in the bar." 5 minutes later, 2 large cups of instant coffee were on the kitchen table. Nearby, fresh loaf and cheese sandwiches were calling for a snack. Amanda had just run to the shop for groceries before work. Kevin acted as if he'd been cooking dinner for the two of them for years, routine and familiar. After the meal, he quickly washed the cups over the kitchen sink and set them in the metal drying rack. He began to say goodbye. "Checked out the furnishings in your house. Until the Olympics are over, I'll meet you from work every day, and then we'll see." He was a quiet man and a very reliable husband, her Kevin. She had never known before what it was like to be behind an impenetrable stone wall. They got close after meeting each other lightning fast, without a long courtship, without a candy bouquet period of special romance. He became her first and only man. And so he remained so to this day. A year after they met, Terence was born, a curly-haired, Kevin like Terence, and 3 years later a fidgety and bully Molly. He and Kevin had already decided that with their common passion for alpine skiing they would stop for now. Marcus, however, as their thoughts had not been heeded, came crashing down like a snowball 3 years after Molly was born. "What a terrible moment," Amanda often said after her husband's death. "How can it be? Just yesterday a man was hugging you, whispering tender words in your ear, living side by side. Today he is gone." Back then, at the beginning of their married life, and later in between having children, Kevin and Amanda spent all their free time in the mountains waiting for the first snow, or seeing it off at the end of the season. Amanda has long since graduated from a pedagogical institute, but she never had the chance to teach school children the rules of spelling and love of literature. At the Olympic Reserve School, where her husband worked, there was a vacancy for a tutor for a younger group of hopeful kids who had come to their town from all over the country. Kevin's parents were medical epidemiologists. They went for the long dollar, hooked on the natives with all their caring hearts. Amanda sometimes joked that their eldest son, Terence, was curly-haired only because Kevin had flown to a distant continent to see his parents and caught a local virus. Molly was just like her mother Amanda, blonde, gray-eyed with an outwardly calm and peaceful disposition. A misleading impression. In fact, she was a collector of pranks, a lover of sharp situations and adventures. The youngest Molly started skiing like a stumbling block. People around her joked. That girl was already born with ski boots and poles in her hands. Amanda stroked the ski equipment on the mezzanine. Her eyes stung with tears again. How ornate everything had turned out then, a year ago. Marcus was born. She was back on maternity leave with him. There was a surprise, a big one, as Kevin laughed. They were walking with the pram in the park near the newsagents. Terence and Molly lingered. They liked the plastic toys in the window. The chatty saleswoman even stretched her head out of the window, admiring their friendly family. And then she went somewhere in the inner pockets and pulled out a slightly tattered lottery ticket. "Young people, I've got a ticket here from the instant lottery. Just rub the strip and you'll see whether you've won or not. It's worth $100. Will you try your luck?" Kevin and Amanda laughed. "We don't believe in any of these lotteries. We'll buy a ticket from you. We'll bore you under the counter for a day to help you out. And these winnings are only shown in TV adverts to fool naive, ordinary people. We don't believe in such freebies." While they chatted with the newspaper and magazine saleswoman, Terrence and Molly picked out a plastic toy each, both of them very pleased with their purchase. Noisily, they rushed forwards down Park Lane. Kevin told Marcus that he couldn't choose his present yet, it was an adult lottery. "Let's wipe off the strip right here," Kevin suggested. Amanda picked up the top layer of paper with the edge of her fingernail. Faded blue numbers began to appear underneath. When she read what appeared on the piece of paper, she grinned and said only one word. "Jokers." "Ari, what's so funny about that?" Kevin reacted instantly. "We won $100 million. A million doesn't smell like a million, but a number with 6 O's looks extremely strange too," Amanda answered him. Terrence and Molly had already returned to the kiosk, having run up and down the alley. The curious owner of the paper treasure peered out of the window. "Have you got a cash win? Up to $100? I can give it to you right here on the spot." "Yes, the number 100 is also on it," replied the bewildered Amanda. "Only it's not just dollars, it's millions." "Fuck you," the aunt said in surprise. I immediately thought that I should have erased the stripe on this seemingly expensive piece of paper with frayed edges. If the winnings are large, you'll have to go to the head office. In my memory, the largest sum of $25,000 was wiped off a ticket by a man. He came to me later and told me that he had been paid off. Excited by the unexpected situation, Kevin and Amanda, picking up the pram with Marcus and the older children, went home. There they took another look at the inscription on the ticket under a magnifying glass. There was no doubt about the numbers. A week later, the alpine ski enthusiasts convened a house council in Philadelphia. Amanda was appointed to preside. She had to say the last weighty word on what to spend the accidentally dropped and already safely received money. The woman thought for a while, and then she gave her verdict. "Kevin, I love you very much. I'm saddened by the longing for snow-capped mountain peaks in your eyes. You've already been to a ski resort with your students this winter season. But I remember your dream to conquer the black slopes on Elbrus. You can't go further than green and blue slopes with your students. They are all beginners." "Mostly," Kevin replied. "A couple of rides on the red slopes in their spare time, and that's it. Adrenaline. You can't build a new passion with that. You've got a week off in a week. I won't be able to keep you company because of Marcus. Go to Elbrus with some of the guys who love skiing," Amanda suggested. At first, his wife's suggestion puzzled Kevin, but his favorite woman was right. After a serious injury 8 years ago, professional skiing in any kind of competitive sport was a thing of the past for him. At first, he was even thoroughly discouraged by the doctor's verdict. Later, he was found by the management of the Olympic Reserve School in his hometown with a proposal to switch to coaching. He still kept in close touch with his friends, the same fans of mountain slopes covered with a cap of fluffy snow. He worked with novice boys and girls in the training center. The pain from the effects of the injury was slowly wearing off. He dreamed of at least once riding on a real dashing track for extreme skiers. He was obsessed with black runs and high difficulty. Kevin was seen off on his trip by his family, then popped into the patisserie to buy their favorite cakes and have tea in the evening to celebrate the head of house's holiday. Kevin always gave so much time to his housemates that their joy for him was genuine. We should let the husband and dad go skiing once in a while too, Amanda considered. Then she vaguely remembered the day when she received a phone call from a ski base near Elbrus, people saying something in Caucasian. They did not speak English well. 4 days after Kevin and his friends arrived at the base, a group of young rich people from the golden elite of society showed up. The young people went to the ski slopes drunk. When the instructor announced the danger of avalanches, they only laughed in his face. "We are not afraid of anything. We went to the track and will continue to go. Today we decided to try out your pro pist. We all have been skiing for years, and you are not our boss," they said to the elderly instructor guide, a Cabardinian with many years of experience, a former sportsman. "Do you even know how many people have already died near the black ski track? How many people, as reckless as you, have ended up in the permafrost, where even the corpses cannot be retrieved later? If you happen to fall to the rocky bottom?" And the weather promises to worsen, he shouted when he heard their statement. But nobody listened to the words of the experienced mountain old-timer. They passed around a flask of whiskey, patted each other on the shoulder and piled out of the wooden log cabin into the street, Kevin told me later. He and his friends, who had already finished their coffee and khachapuri at the table, savoring the aromas of freshly baked pastries, soon got up from the table. Their plans included a short warm-up on the easy green course. They had no intention of taking any risks today. In the courtyard of the ski center, everything was quiet and peaceful. A big shaggy dog was stomping near the booth, having just finished a sugar bone which the cook from the cafe had given him. Here, far from civilization, it was not like anywhere else in the Alps. Much simpler, without the frills of tourist service. It is at the foot of the two-headed giant Elbrus. The regular guests of Kabardino-Balkaria are innumerable. And here, a little further from the village of Terskol, is a place for experienced people, for their own. In an hour after breakfast, a heavy, dense snow began to fall from the gray sky that was beginning to frown and puff up from unreasonable anger. In another hour, the sky was completely covered with inky purple clouds. The Kabardinian was muttering something quietly to himself, pursing his lips in frustration. Then he couldn't stand it any longer, put on warmer clothes, and went off in the direction of the black ski track. Having gone all the way along the paths he knew only to himself, in half an hour he stopped at the very top of the point of descent. At the side of the slope I saw a flock of young men in bright red and yellow jackets. They were fiddling about near the same spot, moving away from it, then approaching it again. The Kabardinian swore again, smelling something wrong. His fears were not in vain. When he reached the woeful skiers, they began to explain to him that they were engaged in an improvised contest. We were descending in a line one after another when three guys who were traveling in front of us fell through the snow like through the ground, they said. They were just gone. I told you. I warned you not to go on the black track. Even if you are drunk and in bad weather, the Kabardinian replied irritably. There are treacherous crevasses everywhere. I'll go and call the guys who ski on the green. Maybe they will help me with something. And I'll call the rescuers at the control and rescue post. They searched for the wayward trio until dark. All the next day, despite the constant threat of avalanche, to no avail. Then the rescuers canceled the expedition and told all the tourists who had found shelter at a remote ski base to descend to the foot of Mount Elbrus. It would be safer there if the acceleration of the snow mass developed at an extreme speed. Kevin couldn't find a place to stay, and then he decided to stay with the Kabardan guard. Both Jenny, the cook, and himself upstairs blamed themselves for not listening to the rich kids talking, for not stopping them when they were about to go to the black ski slope. Kevin was burning inside with a prickling cold. It seemed that it wasn't other people's boys who'd disappeared on the damn ski run, but one of his charges from the Olympic Reserve School. He couldn't find a place, rushing around the warm interior of the log cabin, grabbing his skis, his boots, his cozy warm down jacket. He had left for the mountain before dawn. No one will ever know what he was looking for, who he hoped to pull out from under the avalanche, what snow demons he was talking to. That night an avalanche came down to the foot of Elbrus. Maybe it was she who caught him with her dense snow edge, crushed him with her mass without stopping, rushing down, pinned him to the slope, and then ran further, breaking everything on her way. What dark force had dragged him upwards onto the black track? The old Kabardian was never able to explain to Amanda, who came to collect her husband's body. Kevin was found 3 hours after dawn. Jenny, the cook, was too shy to look in his room and wake him for breakfast. The bed in the room was already cold. Kevin was lying in a fetal position with his arms and legs oddly crossed and tucked up against his stomach near the supposed edges of the cleft. The medical examiner, after the autopsy, wrote a report that his heart had stopped. Amanda, after reading this document, immediately recalled the words of Friedrich Nietzsche. If you stare at the abyss for a long time, the abyss also stares at you. It seemed to her all the time afterwards that the last hours of Kevin's life had been terrible. Just like that, he had magically appeared in her life unobtrusively, without further words or explanations, abruptly and quickly. He'd also left her life without saying goodbye, without explaining anything, without a final look in her eyes. You're not very good at cleaning the mezzanine, Mother Amanda said to herself. Time to feed the children and put them to bed. Marcus wasn't cranky today, thankfully. Kevin and Amanda's youngest son was about to turn 2. She'd recently found an activity that fascinated him so much that he could sit quietly for hours without a peep. The secret was simple. She would place a pair of her cleanly washed trainers in front of him. She would pull the lace out of one of them and leave it in the other. They say that children at 2 years old are still very young, that they don't understand the subtleties. But Marcus was eager to put the lace into the trainer and could sit with this toy for hours on end. The most interesting thing was that, as a result of his diligence, the shoelace that had been inserted into the shoe by his hands looked much neater than the other shoelace that had not been inserted by him. Believe it or not. For the trio's dinner, Amanda fed pancakes with cottage cheese, tea with ice cream and jam. Amanda told everyone to brush their teeth before bed and head for bed. Parents, who had recently started first grade, and Molly, who was used to getting up early for kindergarten, were already accustomed to discipline. Marcus, the quiet one, only fell asleep after reading a story. Amanda had accustomed him to it herself. After that winnings almost unspent by Kevin, they lived on child allowances for the time being. The rest of the gift of fate was spent on lessons in Russian language and literature. Amanda was not a bad tutor for unhelpful pupils, but she couldn't take on many students. A good help could be the rent of Kevin's one-room flat, the renovation of which the family had long called a long construction project. All the years of living together with her husband Amanda never allowed him to sell the property. Before we know it, Terrence will be older and looking for a bride, she joked. All we need to do is freshen up your flat, change its bachelor atmosphere for a more cozy one. We'll have a family nest ready for our handsome Terrence. He's growing by leaps and bounds. Sell both my flat and Kevin's and get something newer and bigger. For some reason, Amanda wasn't feeling well either. It was a feeling she couldn't quite explain. But they had lived in an old 5-story building on the outskirts of the city for 7 years of their marriage. Once again, there was no money to continue renovating Kevin's house. The money melted away inexorably. The question of placing Marcus in an institution was again urgent. But here was the problem. The doctors said that he could not go to a kindergarten. Marcus was often ill with acute respiratory diseases and acute respiratory infections. If he could go to daycare regularly, he'd have to be 5 years old. If Kevin were here, he'd think of something. Amanda thought bitterly. In the meantime, she dutifully picked up Marcus's favorite book to reread his favorite fairy tale to her son for the 100th time. It was his all-time favorite book. Finally put the entire junior guard to bed. It was almost midnight on the clock. Amanda was disappointed to find that there was no bread or milk in the house. Even porridge for breakfast would be difficult to boil. Amanda tiptoed down the corridor, pulled on her coat and shoes, grabbed her bag and ran to the shop. It was a good thing they'd recently opened a convenience store right at the end of their house, where they always had dairy products and fresh baked goods. The golden autumn outside the window rustled the fallen leaves underfoot. The current janitors were not as diligent as Joyce. In her day, she had collected leaves into large bags reluctantly, tentatively. Burning leaves was forbidden by the sanitary control. So the bags first stood along the walls of the house, and then once a week they were taken somewhere by a rubbish truck. Now there was a string of them lined up next to the dark brickwork. Amanda thought there was a shadow moving at the epicenter. Kitty, 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 she called, just in case, as she often fed stray cats. She even promised her children that one day they would have a pet. Hey, I'm going to the shop. Can I buy you some sausages? Show your mustache and stripes. Amanda almost fainted in surprise at the sound of the ringing voice. Thank you, of course. Sausage is good when you're hungry, but I like a big, juicy wiener, even if there's no place to boil them. Who are you? A woman called out. Stranger, you'll be surprised, but I'd really like to know who I am, replied a girl of small stature with 2 braided pigtails and eyes that were clearly not those of a child. Why do you walk alone at night? It's not safe to be out here in the suburbs alone at night. I was shopping in the supermarket, the strange woman replied artlessly. I didn't manage to steal anything from the most vigilant guard. He's on shift today. Are you a thief? Amanda was once again surprised. Not the most promising of jobs, I must say. It happens very rarely, just small things. If you don't manage to earn something honestly one day. Where do you live and with whom? Amanda asked. She was shocked by the answer. Since I was found on the street, I've been living with the homeless in a house being prepared for demolition near the city station. The police know about our community, but for some reason they don't touch us. Maybe they're fine with us being there for a little while under their watch. I have amnesia. We have an old doctor there who's also homeless. She's the one who diagnosed me with it. She's the one who fixed me after I got hit on the head from behind. I don't know who attacked me. I don't remember my name or where I lived before. The girl's trusting confession touched something in Amanda's soul. She immediately asked herself a question. What would Kevin do in her place now? She knew the answer. He would try to do something to help the unfortunate victim of circumstances. Somehow, Amanda was sure that there was no lie in the words of the stranger of the night. Tell you what, let's go to the shop. I need to stock up on milk and bread, and then back to our house. I've got 3 kids. We'll make room somehow, Amanda suggested. I don't feel comfortable. You don't know me at all, she replied. Amanda immediately thought to herself. As a teacher of Russian language and literature, I can't help but notice her correct and well-spoken speech. The girl is obviously not from the marginalized or the slums. What could have brought her to the lair of the homeless? What insidious forces and people had a hand in it? In the supermarket, Amanda examined her find near the bags of fallen leaves in more detail. Poor clothes, but perfectly clean, no holes. She looked to be in her early 20s. In the darkness, the girl seemed almost childlike. The unhappy creature's look was not childish at all. It read some life experience and even a lively mind. This inquisitive gaze of green-brown eyes was not stupid. Apparently, in her past life, this girl had worn glasses. In the brightly lit hall of the supermarket, she checked the expiry dates on the labeling of milk and sour cream. She asked Amanda for clarification. Some of the dates were written in too small numbers. Then she took a long look at the labels on the bread, now wrapped in polythene with colorful pictures, baking names and other information. Amanda was surprised again. She had chosen baked goods only on the basis of freshness, appearance, and naivety. She read something thoughtfully until she put a sliced loaf and a loaf of wholemeal bread in her basket. At the checkout, she didn't fuss and acted confidently. It didn't seem like the sort of thing that someone who was used to stealing and had never known any other way of life could behave. Where did you learn all these tricks to choose the right products? Amanda asked. I don't know. It's like something in my head. It would be better if the name told me my memory, not how to understand bread and milk, the girl replied. They entered the flat quietly. The children were sleeping peacefully. Only the night light in the hall cast faint glints of light on the walls. They call me Agnes among the homeless, because I seem to be a foundling with that name. Will you call me that too, since you've decided to invite me to visit? And don't think I'm being cheeky. Can I take a shower at your place? I've always felt uncomfortable washing in our half-barrack behind a screen fetch water from the pump around the corner, heated up on the electric cooker, for which we always get beaten up by the police. What's all this washing? Amanda brought a large terry towel from the bedroom, gave me some pajamas from her stock, showed me how to use the gas heater. There was not a shadow of doubt in her mind that Agnes would want to steal something from them, take advantage of her trust and deceive her. After her shower, she went to the kitchen, where Amanda had already made her tea with milk and a sandwich with doctor's sausage, which her children loved so much. In the light of the orange lamp, the landlady changed her mind once more. Agnes looked even older when she came out of the hot water, with her hair loose around her shoulders and a deep look in her marsh-colored eyes. Sleep came to both of them. Even though Amanda had to get up at 7 to take her son to school and her daughter to kindergarten, she was curious. She wanted to ask the girl if she remembered anything about her mysterious past. Madeline stretched out sweetly in bed like a graceful kitten. Freedom of movement, freedom of action, freedom to call and text her lover's mobile phone. There was no longer that nasty Nicole standing between them. Ugh. I had to name my daughter so intricately for that oligarch. She is Nicolette Stevenson, favored daughter, wife of a business partner, a successful young woman. So where is she now? I'm looking for her in the field. It was a good idea of hers to get that upstart out of the way. She and her beloved from the school desk made eyes at each other. She with simple dreams, with dreams of a prince on a white horse. He's the son of a successful businessman, Harry. Who in town doesn't know this famous corporation of two long-time associates of Stevenson and the father of her sweet boy? How upset she was when Eric was sent to study in London at some economics academy. They danced so languidly and tenderly at graduation, the envy of all their classmates. Rumors were flying around the school that they were a couple. And then there's this surprise with this study abroad thing. Nicole was not wasting time with her studies at that moment either. The two avid business partners owned shopping malls, restaurants, and supermarkets around the city. Yes, they don't have London, New York, or even major cities here. It's just an average-sized town. But by local standards, the fortunes of the owners of all this wealth are enormous. That kind of big business has to go into safe hands. So Nicole, as everyone around her called her, went to university after school, graduated from the Department of Food Experts. She learned to determine the quality of sausage, cheese, chocolate, and all other products almost unmistakably by their appearance. Eric returned from London a serious, thoughtful young man. Harry was already rubbing his hands together in anticipation that he would be able to hand over the business to his rightful heir in a little while. Stevenson, Nicole's father, was older than his age. Despite the opportunity to receive any treatment in the best clinics in the world, with health and physical capabilities increasingly gave up. In every possible way joined the business to his daughter, who turned out to be a clever and wise assistant. Once, when Eric was still studying in the UK, the two men had a serious conversation. "Harry, mate, you and I have known each other for so many years. In fact, we trust each other. What would you think of my modest plans for my son and your daughter? It would make a handsome couple. We'd pool our capital for future grandchildren." "Yes, Mr. Harry, given the 17-year age difference. I never called my partner by name. I'll be glad to see our offspring work out to our mutual satisfaction. I think they'll get to know each other. They're not the first, they're not the last, they're the ones who seal the business with marital ties. I think that marriage in our commercial times is better to conclude with people of their own circle, so that then unnecessary surprises did not arise. I agree with your idea." The two men had not forgotten when Eric had returned to his hometown, encouraged by his academic success. The two families, and the men had already discussed their plans with their wives and received full approval, began to organize picnics, parties, receptions with the obligatory condition the presence of the whole family. So willy-nilly Nicole and Eric had to cross paths all the time. The young people themselves were not stupid either. Far-reaching ideas of their parents with their minds approved. Of course, they did not feel great and bright love for each other. But love is not required for a marriage of convenience. The main thing was that they sympathized with each other, did not experience obvious dislike, were not negatively disposed when communicating close. The level of intelligence and development, similar interests did the trick. To begin with, they went to lunch a couple of times in a restaurant, to a fashion exhibition and a touring performance of the capital's theater. A couple of months later, Eric invited Nicole to a romantic dinner, where he made her a marriage proposal, handed her a stylish ring and a dainty velvet box thick burgundy color. We drank to the possible future marital happiness. They decided on the date of the reception in honor of the official announcement of the engagement. Nicole allowed herself a couple of glasses of wine. Eric downed 200 grams of whiskey for courage, then made up his mind. "Nicole, I'm sorry to ask, but I'd like to know. Have you had experience with men before?" Nicole, not the least bit embarrassed, simply answered, "I had a 2-year student affair with a guy from a parallel group. We were in our 20s, who at that age only reads poetry and looks at the moon. I wasn't a monk in England either, having been with a student from another college for 3 years. We both knew it was a no-strings-attached affair. She's an educated, well-read person, a loyal mate. But we parted without tears or regrets. Both of us knew from the beginning that it was bound to happen at some point." After this frank conversation, it somehow happened by itself that at Nicole's flat, she had already been living separately from her parents for 2 years. Eric looked into her eyes questioningly. Nicole nodded. Both understood without words. There was a whole life ahead of them. They had to see if they were right for each other. This night for the two of them didn't become something beyond the clouds, fabulously magical. Mutual sympathy, youth, easy interest helped. Nicole had thought at the time that it could be like that. What Eric thought, no one ever knew. but he wasn't particularly disappointed either. The reception in honor of the engagement of the two heirs took place. They were both the only children in the family. The reception was organized at the highest level in the finest country restaurant. Hundreds of guests, the glitter of diamonds and emeralds on the ladies, expensive suits and watches on their beaux, representatives of the press of all stripes from the city multi-circulation to the tabloids. Madeline sat in the beauty parlor and was bored. The queue for hairstyling was still not coming up. She and the girls had gathered at a cafe in the city center to impress everyone with her beauty. Over the years, Eric had become even more flamboyant. A little femme fatale. Married boring, she said. Why the verdict? Yes, the husband turned out to be a promising scientist, but such a nerd. In the shower sits with his snowflakes, all day long digging in old manuscripts. Where is it seen that in the age of the internet, a man collects information from ancient manuscripts? A doll like me should be brought out regularly, so that other men would be envious. And he kept saying, "Darling, you'll soon be proud of your new surname. On me will fall international recognition and fabulous royalties." Madeline would not last a month with this plan. But he was surprisingly handsome and very good in bed. True, on the marital bed he rarely appeared. He preferred to sit in libraries and then at a desk until midnight. Some academy had given him a personal grant for all expenses, so he was not deprived of his daily bread. He had enough to live on with his young wife. Not luxurious, but not poor either. Madeline dreamed of an endless and full-flowing stream of money, so that she could cling to it with greedy hands and lips when she wanted to drink wealth. To hold his material affirmations in her lap, her hands with long nails with a perfect manicure. She ran away from her scholarly husband as soon as she met a brash young entrepreneur at a hen party, socking away money left and right in a nightclub. Her husband had just rushed off to the library of a neighboring town. There's something interesting picked up for him, and there he stayed the night. She agreed to accompany the visiting businessman to his hotel room. The night went terribly, but she did not go home empty-handed after the meeting. Generous, inexperienced lover gave her such a sum for a couple of hours of dialogue which her husband did not give her for 6 months for expenses. Made it clear that the encounter was casual. There would be no sequel. Madeline thought hard. She needs to find the chosen one, so that as a man was not much worse than her current husband, and in the funds are not constrained and not greedy, would be happy to cherish the woman she loved. It would be better, undoubtedly, that she received the status of his lawful wife. But that would still have to be worked on thoroughly. In the pile of magazines on the nightstand in the beauty parlor, something on the cover of one of them looked painfully familiar to her. She grabbed an edition of the local yellow press and laughed out loud for the whole room. "Look, the golden carp is back from London," she whispered fervently in her friend's ear. And he had found himself some bride in the local aristocratic beau monde. All intellectual with glasses. How was it in the famous comedy? "If she gives me one, I'll take her without a hitch, but first, Maggie, I have to show my first love in front of my eyes to see what a woman with a capital letter should look like." Madeline's devious plans were not to be realized at once. Harry and Grant decided that it would be a good idea if their children went on not one trip like a honeymoon, but 2. First, they would go to the Dominican Republic with its tropical delights, dive into the turquoise Atlantic Ocean. They will walk by hand on velvet white sands, admire the local flora and fauna. At the same time, they will get used to the idea that immediately after their return, a big lavish wedding will be held in the city. The position obliges. After the marriage ceremony, the newlyweds will go to more civilized Europe for a couple of months to finally consolidate their feelings in the formed marriage union. They can manage without the heirs to the big kingdom for the time being. In Grant's office 5 years ago, a promising young specialist had appeared, and the elderly businessman had been delighted with him ever since. Grant was brilliantly educated, had received a red diploma in Washington, and was a native of their city. He refused to pursue a career in the capital for the reason that his elderly parents lived at home. They already required constant supervision. They themselves did not cope well even with household chores. A late child is the one and only. His father and mother still found the strength to help him graduate from the Lyceum, to get an education in Washington. And then they gave up. They sat in front of the TV all day long. Almost stopped going outside. Grant was recommended by Harry, an old university friend of his. "He's a rare bloke. He's a great personal assistant," he said. "Yes, we were going to leave the running of the holding company in the hands of our children," said Harry. "I have other plans. One can't interfere with the other. No one's suggesting that you make him CEO of the whole company. Let him hang around with you for a while and then we'll see." And he was right. The owners of the holding company had long trusted their deputy general director. Grant received this position from them a year ago. While the children were traveling, getting used to the new family life after the wedding, Grant was pulling all the managerial burdens and coped with them perfectly. Madeline was the only one who wasn't bored. While the newlyweds were out of town, she perfected her appearance again and again. The gossip of the world reported that Eric and Nicole's marriage had been officially registered after all. But when could such a trifling obstacle stop her? Or would this man be her husband? We'd just have to wait. The young people returned from Europe tanned and rested. Both were eager to get back to work as soon as possible. Relations between them were even reminiscent of mates. They were not in a hurry to have a child. They decided to delay this important matter. Madeline prepared the meeting with Eric as a strategic operation. She found out where the young businessman goes to lunch on weekdays, wore her most stylish outfit, knowing perfectly well that in it, and with fashionable, almost imperceptible makeup, she is irresistible. The altercation with the waitress attracted the attention of the entire catering establishment. At the moment when Eric had just sat down at one of the tables, Madeline had played the whole thing out. She gave the waitress a subtle nudge under her arm, and a cup of chocolate flew onto Madeline's snow-white suit. "What have you done?" she exclaimed. "Girl, do you know how much such a jacket from the latest collection can cost? You can't pay for it in a year with your meager salary." Eric involuntarily turned his head in the direction of the frightening lady and marveled how marvelously beautiful she was. Madeline also looked in his direction, immediately stopped bringing up the waitress, and smiled welcomingly. "Eric, are you?" she asked. A minute later, they were already sitting at the same table. Eric was amazed at the change that had taken place with his high school sweetheart. Groomed, regal, alluring, not like his quiet, always even-tempered, ordinary wife. Madeline had a fire in her that promised unearthly pleasure. "And Eric fell for me," the money hunter thought predatorily. "I've got to take this chance and squeeze him. But first, a little tease." "Oh, Eric, I'd love to meet you, but I'm in a hurry," said Madeline. "I have an appointment, and I have to go home and change. My suit is hopelessly ruined." "A little thing like that isn't worth your trouble," Madeline said. "Eric, where can I buy one just like it? Let's meet tomorrow and fix this mistake of the negligent waitress." The golden carp has taken the bait, Madeline decided in no uncertain terms. Eric was also burning with impatience, waiting for the next meeting with Madeline. In Eric's soul, conscience didn't even squeak. Grant liked Harry's daughter, and now his son's wife. He couldn't help it. No, that definition would not even be correct. Was he in love, or was it her? Nicole had long ago and hopelessly. This young woman walked past him like he was nothing. A polite hello when she met him, and immediately forgot he existed. With the gaze of a loving man, Grant noted that there was no real warmth between Nicole and Eric. Dry cultural politeness, a tribute to the idea of keeping and growing the business. That was where it ended. Once, a long time ago, before all the marital processes and even the engagement, Grant had even had the impulse to open up to Nicole, to tell her how he felt. But it was on that day that he had accidentally witnessed a conversation between Harry and Terrence's families. Harry said, "Can you imagine, mate, Terrence, the daughter of one of our competitors married some penniless bloke, and the father didn't even bat an eye. Let her choose with her heart. What kind of sincere feelings can there be in our business? I think that with such views on life, a solid business will never be built." Hearing this rant, Grant immediately changed his mind about something to say to Nicole. He loved her silently to himself, not paying attention to other girls. Although with his masculine appearance, the entire female cohort of the team cast explosive glances at him. Thank God, at least his heart's secret no one guessed. There was chatter that his heart was broken by some hottie from New York. Eric and Madeline were drowning in an ocean of unearthly passion. In fact, Madeleine herself did not throw herself into the maelstrom of all these sentimental tricks. She had calculated everything. Eric never came to a date without an expensive gift. Her entire flat was now littered with luxurious bouquets of flowers. There were incredibly expensive birthday outfits in her wardrobe, a small, sleek car of astronomical value, and even with technical tuning for the 8th of March, a stunningly beautiful canvas from Somalia. Eric was a generous lover, earned an excellent income, and had a personal bank account, with the contents of which his father had no interest. Let the boy have some funds for pocket money. Somehow, once again, Madeleine was lazily bored. She ran through the television channels and came across an very old cartoon film called Last Year's Snow Falling. Its busy character kept moving through space with the phrase, "It's going to be a bit small." At that moment, Madeleine acutely realized that she didn't want to remain in the role of the second woman in Eric's life. After all, her partner never stayed overnight at her place anyway, or went to Nicole's place in the next fancy hotel, and she even suspected that he never did his marital duty at home. Nicole lived in complete ignorance. Her husband at work, at corporate receptions, at city social gatherings was always there, as he should be. And how he spent his time in other hours, she did not care at all. Inside Nicole lived a certain mystery. After returning from Europe, already being the legal wife of Harry Jr., she once found herself at work in the same lift with Deputy General Manager Grant. He stood silently, without making a sound, facing his boss's daughter. He was looking at her in a way that gave her goosebumps. A thought was born in her head. I shouldn't think that. But you can't fool yourself. If only instead of Eric, my husband had been this charismatic, charming, very intelligent, and very polite man. Why did fate decide that I should continue the dynasty in my father's business? One must follow the call of one's heart. On the top floor, Nicole stepped out of the lift and headed for her office, dispelling the obsession on the way, the magic of Grant so suddenly captivating her. She'd liked the young man from the first moment she'd met him. But she remembered her father's favorite motto: "The position obliges." She pulled herself together and ordered, "Don't you dare even think of him. Your fate is the fate of the girl in the novel. But I'm given to another, and I'll be faithful to him forever. So pull yourself together and work." Nicole hadn't forgotten that meeting in the lift. She pulled those memories out of the recesses of her mind when she was alone. Her father had been shifting more and more business tasks onto her shoulders. She and Grant were always crossing paths at meetings, but they sat far apart. Nicole didn't even notice that her husband Eric's schedule was increasingly filled with overnight trips to branch offices. Their cold marriage of convenience did not bring them both simple human happiness. Nicole couldn't even remember the last time she and her husband had been close. At that time, Madeleine was preparing to give Eric an ultimatum, either her or that nasty Nicole. Eric was disappearing more and more often with his mistress, sometimes for the whole weekend. She decided that the next few days, coinciding with the annual holiday, would be a good time to talk. Eric had promised that they would fly to Miami for all 3 days under the guise of a business meeting with Southern partners. The trip to Miami was extremely romantic. There was only one thing that frustrated Eric. Madeleine did not want to spend time in bed. He was drawn to a Cuban restaurant or a trendy new chain cafe where the seafood was amazing. Even lavish shopping at the local mall hadn't made her more amenable. The man was puzzled by this behavior of hers, reeking of either chill or indifference. By nightfall, after a lavish dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the resort, Madeleine hardly showed up and got into bed with him side by side, but she wouldn't let him near her. She started a conversation. "Eric, don't you think it's time for us to make up our minds about our relationship? I'm not going to spend the rest of my life as your second lover." "Girl, you know what our marriage to Nicole is based on. Divorce is impossible. We're the management center of a huge holding company. If it doesn't hold together, it's going to crack. There'll be no more opportunities to spoil you like this." "But what about me?" Eric asked angrily, not expecting such a blatant refusal at once. "The eternal number 2 in the shadow of your Nicole. That's not going to happen." That night, for the first time, Eric was never allowed to see the body. He flew home angry. Madeleine, sitting next to him, kept her mask of hurt and offense on her face. They both took separate taxis home. A week after that ill-fated trip to Miami, Madeline had a new plan in her head. If Nicole couldn't be moved, she had to be wiped off the face of the earth. She did not even care about the fact that such a plan smells of crime. Madeline was still in a furious rage. Eric decided to take time out and give his precious mistress time to calm down and accept his arguments wisely. That's why it didn't even occur to him to be suspicious when his wife disappeared without returning from work one evening. Upon learning that Nicole, whom he loved devotedly, had disappeared, Grant was at a loss for words and decided to conduct his own investigation. It had long seemed to him that Eric had been acting extremely strange in recent months. Telling his father and his partner that he would be late in the office with the documents that had accumulated like a snowball, and then mysteriously disappearing as soon as the two partners went home. Unable to resist, he decides to play a homegrown private investigator. To follow Eric, who, once outside the walls of the holding company, was not really hiding. Grant learned about the fact that he had a mistress after a couple of days. Moreover, following the heir to the family turned into an obsession for Grant. He recorded the facts of Eric's adultery with pedantry and meticulousness, expensive spending on gifts, trips to restaurants, trips to country clubs, dates in secluded hotels. He was eager to build up a collection of pictures, and he'd taken plenty of shots of Eric and Madeline from different angles, and get all that dirt in front of their families. The only thing stopping him was that he didn't know the terms of the marriage. What was disconcerting was that Nicole remained completely unperturbed. Meeting her alone in the lift, he tried to understand her inner state. He even scolded himself later for keeping an eye on her, trying to see through her like an X-ray. She was absolutely as calm as usual. She did not resemble a woman suffering from her husband's treacherous betrayal. The last straw in Grant's patience with Eric's low behavior was Nicole's disappearance. Everyone in the office had seen the young woman take her bag in the evening and hurry to the exit to the car park, get into her car and drive away. Nicole didn't show up at home that day. Eric didn't sound the alarm until the next day. He had gone out with Madeline the night his wife disappeared. Mistress again turned into a wax pussycat, faithfully looked into her eyes and said that she understood everything and agreed to everything, as long as the beloved was near. The day after the mysterious disappearance of her daughter, Joyce was no laughing matter. She was madly in love with Nicole, though she tried not to show it to anyone. The entire security team of the holding company had been alerted, and the police had joined in. Harry had enlisted the help of some private investigators he knew. To no avail. All the city and regional hospitals and morgues had already been checked. Joyce's men with Nicole's picture had looked at all the unidentified female corpses. A week later, Nicole's car was found near a park on a short walk with her bag lying orphaned in the back seat. To everyone's surprise, no barbarity had been committed to the property. Harry was going crazy, and Grant was tossing and turning between his duty to the chief and his inner doubts, all the while asking himself, how am I going to show Joyce a picture of her son-in-law with his mistress? It would lead to a quarrel between long-standing business partners, a split of a huge company, a misunderstanding between two businessmen in whose hands many of the city's commercial arteries were connected. Still, Grant made up his mind. He came to the boss's office on woozy legs, not because he realized. He was likely to lose his place in the holding company. He didn't care as long as Nicole was found, as long as she was alive and well. He knocked firmly on the door. He saw at once that Joyce had lost a great deal of color in the last few days, the Earth's fifth complexion, the fallen, unhappy eyes. What do you want, Grant? I haven't much time for work at the moment, she said. I think you ought to see this, Mistress Joyce, Grant said. He fanning the table with all the pictures he'd taken of Eric's movements. The businesswoman took the dirt on her son-in-law on her hands and went through the photos one by one, becoming more gloomy than ever. I have a feeling that Nicole's disappearance has something to do with this woman, Grant added. Why were you guys doing all this snooping? Digging up your bosses, wanting to dig up something exclusive and ruin our reputation? I love your daughter, Mrs. Joyce. I wasn't digging and digging. I just want her to be happy. Eric's behavior had been suspicious to me for some time, so I rushed to find out what's going on. Can you fire me now? Why didn't you come to me earlier with all this nastiness? Nicole seemed very serene to me. I didn't see fit to disturb her peace. Joyce glared at Grant once more. then pressed the secretary's call button. "Send the head of security to me and tell Mr. Harry I'd like to see him in my office." Grant was taken aback. In the past, the younger Joyce had always gone to the partner herself when she had questions. Yes, and all corporate meetings were always held in the boardroom next to Harry's office. "You're free to go, Grant. I'll let you know how I feel about your outside initiatives," Joyce said. The conversation between the two oldest partners was heavy. But first Joyce showed Harry all the photos Grant had taken. Without saying where she had got the material from, she asked directly, "Did you know your son was having an affair with his mistress?" "No, I didn't know that," Harry replied. "If I had known, I would have tried to stop it." The head of security knocked on the door. The men concentrated on working out a plan to find Nicole due to the newly discovered circumstances. Madeline was nonchalantly drinking coffee and chatting with a friend on the phone when someone knocked on her flat door. She stretched sweetly, pulled up the hem of her silk dressing gown and asked coquettishly, "Honey, is this your idea of a joke? You have a key, don't you?" "Open up, Madeline. Eric sent us to see you," came the reply. The woman opened the door immediately. Two big guys, either from the military or from the sporting world, poured into the flat. "Where's Nicole?" One of them asked sharply. "We warn you that the next person who knocks on your door will be the police." Madeline flapped her eyelashes indignantly. "I don't know who Nicole is. There must be some mistake." The second of the uninvited guests dumped photos on the coffee table in front of her. "We'll still prove that you had something to do with her disappearance. And then you'll be facing a much more serious criminal offense than you are now." In a moment, the beautiful Madeline, hiding her face in horror, turned into a pitiful semblance of a femme fatale. She hurried off in a confused hurry. "I only asked the boys at the bar to scare her. And those idiots overdid it, hit her on the head from behind with something heavy. When I gave them the money for the work, they said they were confused, took her under their arms to the waiting room at the railway station and sat her on a free chair. She didn't lose consciousness after the injury, but she became lethargic and strange. They thought it would be a good thing and tried to disappear as quickly as possible." The bloke showed her the phone they'd recorded the conversation and her confession on. "You'd better go to the police yourself, as a customer. If Nicole's father takes you in, things will be much worse," they said firmly. Further searches became easier. The security service of the holding company turned the whole station upside down and came to the lair of the bums. When they saw Agnes's photo, they told everything they knew without refusal. Yeah, they found one at the station, dragged her in. Rose's doctor nursed her back to health, treated her as best she could. Only she never remembered who she was. Then they all taught the new girl a trade, how not to disappear in the big city. Clothes were taken. Expensive ones were lost and sold at the clothing market. Watches and jewelry went there too. Agnes didn't have her phone with her. Apparently, the people who hit her on the head took the expensive toy. A few days ago, she didn't return from a night out in the field where she used to work part-time. So, she was picking weighed fruit and vegetables in the back of supermarkets. It's a temp job. If you look decent, they can trust you. The entire security service of the holding company went to all the places where homeless people sometimes try to earn a little bit of honest money. In 2 places, Nicole was immediately recognized, and in one shop, the checkout lady said, "I know this girl. She's always so polite and cultured. She often buys groceries from us. Sometimes she comes alone, sometimes with an older woman or with her younger brothers and sisters." The servicemen were surprised. "Maybe it's not our Nicole. They all live in that 5-story building. But we can't name the flat." "You can ask the grandmothers in the courtyard," the cashier told them. Amanda couldn't be happy that one dark autumn night she met Agnes in the courtyard. She was a golden assistant, clearly well-educated and well-read. She found an excellent rapport with the children, who listened to all her stories with their mouths open. Marcus was hugging Agnes by the side of her leg and would not let her go. Amanda could now safely leave the house to study with the students. The school year was gaining momentum, and many students were lagging behind in Russian language and literature. There was no shortage of clients. Amanda went to the supermarket to buy some cakes. They would have a sweet party tonight with Agnes and the children to watch some interesting film. The cashier at the exit looked at her strangely, as if she wanted to say something, but then remained silent. Amanda thought. My mascara must have smeared when I rubbed my eye with my fist. Well, the house is just around the corner. And there's a mirror. The drive to their entrance was blocked by a cortege of expensive cars. All elite foreign cars, big with shiny pearlescent sides. Men in strict suits, white shirts, and ties stood near the cars. One of them was obviously very nervous. Grant was asking to ride with security to where Nicole was presumably now, so pitifully that the stern businessman McDowell's heart trembled. Go ahead. But to me they're without any tricks, he said. It had recently occurred to Harry that they had been wrong to strategize a marriage of convenience between the children of two high-ranking families. Eric, after his affair with Madeline had been discovered, had rushed to follow new trails, and lingered under the police station where his mistress was in custody. Grant, on the other hand, wouldn't go home until security brought new tidings to the chief in the evenings about how the search for Nicole was progressing. You can't command the heart to love. It's not subject to human will, he thought. Amanda walked up to her flat as if through a line, but stopped when she heard her neighbor Chloe's voice. Oh, there she is herself. Is it in her house now, the girl you're looking for? Is that who all those expensive jeeps with tinted windows are after? I knew Agnes was a tricky girl. What an entourage. She turned to the men. I'll take one of you with me. You're going to scare the children with this team? Shall I go? The handsome man, who seemed to be the most nervous, stepped forward. The head of security grinned. Well, go on, Mr. Deputy General Manager. Maybe you'll be of more use. Agnes opened the door and saw a strange man behind Amanda. He rushed towards her, grabbed her in his arms. Oh my God, Nicole, are you alive? It's so good to see you. We all went crazy when you disappeared. A click in my head, a brief flash, a silver lift with a stylish design. Two people enter the office, a man and a woman. And the woman felt so good to have this man around. That's what Grandma Rose used to say back at the homeless shelter. Your memory is like lightning flying. It will come back, baby. You just need strong emotions and it will serve you well again. Away with doubt. Nicole remembered who she was, how she'd parked her car outside a kiosk to buy a bottle of cool mineral water, how someone had approached quietly from behind, as if sneaking around, and then pain and failure. Nicole stepped towards Grant and put her arms around his strong, powerful shoulders. It's good to see you too, Grant. It's really good to see you. Since the mysterious story of Nicole's disappearance, there have been abrupt changes in the city's richest holding company. Mr. Harry, who had been very hard hit by recent events, had completely handed over the reins of the company to his partner, Mr. McDowell. He even sold his shareholding to him. They say it's undervalued, as compensation for moral hazard. The rich don't get it. Harry's son, Eric, lives in a town near the penal colony where his mistress Madeline is serving time. He started drinking. Recently, he was even seen in the company of two local celebrity alcoholics, Henry and Alex. Madeline herself does not react to the exploits of her lover. She is having an affair with one of the zone workers. Why does she need Eric? Now it is necessary to look for a more favorable option for themselves. McDowell did his best for his daughter. Madeline's going to be in the penitentiary for another 6 years. Her lawyer hinted she might not even be eligible for parole. Grant and Nicole were recently married, but on a wedding trip abroad refused to go. They went to conquer Karelia with its beauty. No luxury hotels. A tent, a fire, soup in a kettle, tea with berries, a really favorite person next to them. That's happiness. Mr. McDowell has taken up charity work. His first brainchild was a school for talented children from disadvantaged families. The director of the school, a teacher of Russian and literature, Amanda. Her youngest son, Marcus, learned to read early. He spends hours in the library at his mom's work. Recently, Amanda took a Maupassant book away from him and said, "That's not for you to read yet, my young lover of good literature." Amanda herself has not yet found a man to her liking. There is no equal to Kevin, so it's better to be alone than with anyone. Each of them learnt their lessons from the fact that fate once pushed them into this world. They each drew their own conclusions from what had happened. Life is a mixed bag. Seeing a rich woman throwing away a baby pram, a beggar decided to take it for herself. And as soon as she opened P4, Sandra scrutinized the woman's face on the laptop screen. It so happened that the search engine had accidentally given her an article about this Tiffany, the founder of a charity fund to help children in difficult situations, left without parents or brought up in very poor families. A mature, well-groomed woman, kind look, open smile, stylish, so energetic. Sandra couldn't take her eyes off her face. She gazed, remembering was she or wasn't she. It looked like she was. She couldn't be sure. After all, Sandra had seen her only once in her life almost 15 years ago. And yet some inner feeling told her that this was the woman who had once played such a big role in the fate of their family. What would have happened to them all if it hadn't been for Tiffany? Or was it not her after all? Sandra ran her eyes over the article once again. It talked about Tiffany's life. She was quite happy now as she had finally found her true calling. The woman helps children and considers it her life's work. Tiffany had even taken in 3 babies from an orphanage, the kind that everyone else had given up on. They had health and behavioral problems, but now they were well-adjusted teenagers, 2 girls and a boy. They posed for pictures with their foster mother, beautiful, dressed up, smiling, and just 10 years ago, no one would have given them a chance. Tiffany proved by her own example that the impossible is possible. The main thing is love, faith in children, and willingness to work long and hard. Not everyone can do that, of course. Tiffany is rich. Her husband is a big businessman, the owner of a famous chain of petrol stations. And she's achieved a lot herself. For many years, she worked as a stockbroker and managed to make a fortune. In an interview, Tiffany admitted that she used to consider her career as the main thing in her life, and money was not even the main motivator. No, Tiffany grew up in a fairly wealthy family and has never known want. Sandra read this article on the internet like a fascinating book, holding her breath. It seemed that Tiffany was the guardian angel and savior of their family. Everything fit together with amazing accuracy. It was just that the work fascinated her, enthralled her, completely inspired her. It was kind of like an interesting game that a woman would give herself over to. And then everything changed. Tiffany was in her early 40s at the time. She started thinking about having kids. And that's when it became clear that it wasn't that simple. Sandra pulled away from the screen, leaned back in her chair, and sighed heavily. The memories came back to her in slow waves. Heavy memories of the past. She had been on the verge of despair then. Sandra couldn't cope with the hardships that had been thrust upon her. Nothing good seemed to lie ahead of her. The hopeless misery of survival. Sandra, then very young and inexperienced, did not want to wake up in the morning because what good could another day bring her? A terrible state of mind. She had never experienced anything like it before or since. Sandra's life hadn't been spoiled at all. She was born into a very poor family. Her mom worked as a cleaner. Her dad worked odd jobs wherever he could. Both of them were uneducated. They finished 9 grades and didn't go on to further studies. Then somehow they met and started living together. As far as Sandra knew, her parents weren't even married. The 3 of them lived in an old wooden building on the outskirts of town in a former barrack. The family had a small flat there, or rather, they rented it with their own corner. Sandra's father and mother never got their own place. They were both quite happy with that life. If one of the spouses managed to earn more money, there was a party with drinking, cheerful neighbors, dancing, talking until morning, and sometimes fights. On such days, Sandra bought cheap sweets from the nearest shop, stale gingerbread, chocolates with nuts, soda in tin cans. The little girl felt almost happy. But the truth is, fear always came afterwards. The drunken guests of her parents, many of them instilled fear in Sandra. Sometimes she even did not sleep at night, listening to the sounds in the kitchen. Until now, the girl thought that everyone lived the same way she did. Sandra did not go to kindergarten. From the age of 3, she was left alone at home while her parents worked or went for a walk somewhere. She even liked it. She could play wherever she wanted and make as much noise as she wanted. No one reprimanded her or calmed her down. Sandra had many friends in the yard. The girl knew them from birth. They were the children of the very neighbors with whom her parents were so closely associated. These boys and girls grew up just like Sandra herself. It was a rough neighborhood. That's how everyone lived. And then it was time to go to school. And it was there that Sandra realized how different her own life was from that of many other children. Her classmates had beautiful new bags and clean clothes. They brought beautiful toys to school, discussed computer games and trips to the sea. Sandra felt like she was in another world. At first, the children tried to stay away from the unkempt Sandra. The girl wore an old dress with worn orange shoulders, inherited from one of the neighbors. The little girl was very out of place, and Sandra herself was in no hurry to get close to her classmates, who were like aliens to her. But Sandra looked closely at these girls and boys. She understood a lot about this life by looking at them, and tried hard to fit in with this alien, but so attractive world. Sandra learned to keep her things in her workplace in order. Around her small desk there could be chaos, empty bottles, some rags, rubbish, but the desk itself was perfectly clean. The girl began to ask her parents for new things, albeit cheap, but from the shop, not from someone else's shoulder. Sometimes she even managed to persuade her parents to buy, and Sandra also tried very hard to study hard. True, with this was trouble. The girl honestly crammed all the rules in the textbook and memorized the formulas, but still made mistakes in words and examples. And physics and chemistry remained for her an incomprehensible science. Sandra was frustrated, but she didn't give up. She studied diligently and studied hard. Teachers saw it and praised her for her diligence. Even overestimated hard-working Sandra, encouraged as they could. But Sandra realized that she would not make a scientist, and so would like to become an economist or lawyer, to work in the office, to walk in a beautiful blouse and a narrow skirt, and be sure to wear high-heeled shoes. But the girl was very mature for her years and realistically looked at things. She knew that she would not reach university, but she would definitely get a specialized secondary education. Teachers helped the diligent student, drew her a good certificate. Thanks to this, Sandra entered college as a pastry chef. The profession seemed to her suitable, in demand, useful. "You'll never go hungry," her mother approved of her daughter's choice. Her father was gone by that time. He had died a year earlier from poor quality alcohol. Mother, by the way, also briefly survived the spouse. When Sandra was studying in the second year, her mother, drunk, fell asleep in the cold and froze to death. Sandra that night was preparing for exams because it was a winter session and did not suspect anything. She thought that her mother, as always, would stay the night where she was walking, but she decided to return home. So very young Sandra, who was barely 18 years old, was left alone. It was good to be an adult, or she would have had to go to an orphanage. Sandra suffered the death of her parents, no matter how they were, but still loved her, and in their own way took care of her daughter, never beat, never humiliated. And the fact that sometimes they were indifferent, so they themselves had such a childhood. No one had taught them how to bring up children properly. But the girl did not have to worry long. Life itself did not give. She now had to think about how to provide for herself. No, Sandra had been working a little bit by little for a long time. She cleaned the floors instead of her mother or her shift worker, or substituted for a saleswoman in a local shop for a few hours. But now Sandra needed a lot more money because she had to pay rent, take the bus to college every day, and eat. So Sandra got a job as an assistant in the school canteen. The job was hard in every sense. She had to carry heavy pots and pans from place to place all day long. After the shift, Sandra felt as exhausted as a lemon. And what was there to study for? Of course, the girl could not combine work and college. She was soon expelled. Sandra cried then from despair, injustice, and impossibility to change anything. Wow, she tried so hard to make it in the people, and in the end repeats the fate of her parents, also left without education. But Sandra will definitely not drink, and she will have a family of her own, with a caring, hard-working husband who will take care of her. Maybe she will have time to finish her studies. Who knows how life will turn out? Sandra dreamed of having a family. She was tired of living alone. She wanted to have a reliable man to rely on. But the local boys were not suitable for a life partner. They were firmly following in their parents' footsteps, and it was obvious. Looking at the peers with whom she grew up, Sandra wondered, do not they realize that they need to somehow get away from such a fate, at least try to fix something? But they didn't seem to see anything special in their way of life. Everything suited them. They felt quite happy, got together, had children and split up, had fun parties with fights and long conversations about nothing. Just like their parents. Sandra had been invited once, but she'd always refused. Why are you ruining my reputation, you smart ass? You've got a bad temper, looking down on everyone. Cynthia, a neighborhood girl and once Sandra's closest friend, complained. Cynthia didn't work. Why should she? She already had a young son for whom she received a good amount of child support. I wish she had child support from the father. But the trouble was, he didn't work. Cynthia often invited Sandra to visit. The girl refused. She knew exactly what went on behind the flat doors, the same thing that had once happened in her own home. Partying, meaningless conversations and fights. Sometimes Sandra wondered, I wonder why I turned out so different. Perhaps it would have been easier for her if she had turned out like everyone else. But no, Sandra longed for something different. She realized that she needed to move somewhere else first, otherwise she would never get out of this quagmire. But she was desperately short of money. And then Sandra met Scott by chance. The girl was returning from another shift, tired, could hardly move her legs. She sat down to rest on a bench, bought an ice cream. She spent the whole day in the canteen, where they had a terrible heat. I wanted to cool down at least a little. It was the middle of May, and the weather was quite summer-like. It was quiet, calm, and beautiful in the park. Dressed-up people were walking along the paths. Pleasant music was coming from the speakers. I didn't want to go home to my barracks. There again, there were parties behind the wall, poverty and hopelessness all around. Those people in the park probably don't realize that there is another world out there. They think it's just as beautiful and clean everywhere else. Happy. Why are you sad? There was a voice. A young man sat down on the bench. He was pleasant, with an open smile, kind dark eyes, charming dimples on his cheeks, and slightly disheveled brown hair. I was walking in the park, not touching anyone, and then suddenly such an amazing phenomenon, a beautiful girl on a bench, alone, very beautiful and very sad. It's not right. Sandra smiled. A cute guy called her beautiful. Great. That even gave her goosebumps running down her back. Not at all like the greasy compliments of Sandra's neighbors. But what kind of beauty is she? She's just ordinary. Just ordinary. What's he doing here? Jason the stranger introduced himself. May I ask your name? I don't mean to be insolent or intrusive. Just so I can address you in some way. You don't mind, do you? Sandra. The girl smiled a little embarrassed. She wondered what would happen next. Jason wasn't repulsive, he wasn't tense. On the contrary, he had a way about him. His smile was warm, kind, sincere. They sat on that bench for a long time, talking about everything, telling each other about themselves, and gradually growing closer, becoming almost kin. Jason, too, had been left without parents. He had been raised by his aunt, his maternal sister. He didn't know his father, and his mother had died when he was barely 5 years old. A very young woman was let down by a sick heart. So little Jason ended up in his aunt's family. She was not too happy about the extra mouth in the house, but did not put out. However, she could not surround her nephew with love and care. Jason understood this fact, and was grateful to his aunt for not sending him to an orphanage. It's better than growing up among strangers, he reasoned, but it's family, I guess. Sandra shook her head. Jason might be right, but his aunt was still too indifferent and aloof. Sandra's mother and father certainly loved her in their own way and cared for her daughter as best they could. Jason, it turns out, knew no parental affection or love at all. After completing 9th grade, Jason enrolled in technical school and began studying to be a welder, but never finished his training because he needed to work. Feeding an 18-year-old forehead wasn't something his aunt was going to do. I have raised you to adulthood. I have fulfilled my duty, decided this strict woman on the birthday of my nephew. Now be kind to start your own life, to move out. It's time for you to move out. So the guy had to hurriedly finish the driver's course and get a job at the base of the factory. Sandra even gasped when she heard that. How similar to her own story. She couldn't finish her studies either. That's why she had to support herself. She was just a little bit away from graduation, but she had to get a job. I'm grateful to my aunt for doing that, Jason smiled. But I'm only 20 now, and I'm a fully independent person. My peers are still on their parents' backs, and I'm my own boss. Jason rented a flat in a good neighborhood, and he managed to find a good job. He drove for the head of a big factory. The pay was pretty good. It was enough to live on, and even have some fun. Jason and Sandra had never been apart since that memorable evening. First they met, went on dates. The guy was always coming up with something new. They walked around the old city center, looking at unusual buildings, or sat in cafes. They would go to cafes, places the girl didn't even know existed, or something else. After only a month, Jason suggested that Sandra move in with him. She gladly accepted. Why, it's even more profitable to rent one flat instead of two. Besides, she had wanted to leave her barracks for a long time. Jason was kind, caring, sensitive. He was exactly the kind of man Sandra had always dreamed of having around. He could do everything: cook, make repairs, and handle money. Handy, responsible, economical. Most importantly, he loved Sandra very much. The girl felt it. Of course, she loved Jason too. And the young people felt really happy then. There were so many good things ahead of them. It seemed to both of them that they would succeed together. It was no coincidence that fate had brought together two people with such similar stories and the same outlook on life. Jason worked as a driver. Sandra continued to work in the school canteen. Now she would come home, happily buy something tasty on the way to make dinner for her lover, and wait for him to come home from work. They married a month after they started living together. That's how quickly things developed for them. They didn't have a big wedding. What's the point? No extra money. There were no relatives who would need all this festive action. It was better to buy something for the house. We celebrated together in a restaurant. We had a lovely time. Jason looked at Sandra with serious eyes and said he would do anything for their family. We'd be happy, we'd have children, and they'd be happy for us. I'd do anything, Sandra recalled. And Jason did try to keep that promise. He worked hard. He was given bonuses, which he put aside for future housing. The couple had a shared dream of getting their own flat, and they were on their way to it. Both, of course, realized that the fulfillment of this desire is still far away. But nothing, not all at once, slowly. Jason and Sandra decided not to rush into having children. Both thought that first they needed to earn their own corner. The couple wanted their baby to have a happy, carefree childhood. Not like theirs. But fate, as it seems, has a plan for everything. One day Sandra realized she was expecting a baby. She had a sort of epiphany one morning. It was too early to suspect anything, but Sandra was suddenly struck by the thought that a baby was already living and developing inside her. At first, Sandra waved away these conjectures. Then she took a test 2 stripes. There could be no doubt. Well, the mother-to-be was hardly surprised. She could feel everything. At that time, Sandra had no idea that at the same time a complete stranger to her, who would soon play a huge role in the life of their young family, was also rejoicing at the positive test. Jason was happy to hear the news, picked up the young wife Sandra in his arms and spun her around the room. The father-to-be hugged his beloved so tightly that it was even difficult for her to breathe. Wow. I was afraid to tell you. I thought you would be upset, smiled Sandra, looking at the shining husband. Why is that? He was surprised. Well, we wanted our own flat first to get on our feet, and then. We planned everything completely differently, but for some reason I'm incredibly happy. This is the best news I've ever heard in my entire life, Jason agreed. Sandra smiled. Jason is so good. She was just now getting used to having someone like that around. The best, the nicest man on the whole planet. And he loves her. What a blessing it is. The young couple began to prepare for the arrival of an heir. Sandra was transferred to a lighter job. She was no longer allowed to carry pans and her salary was reduced. But Jason started taking part-time jobs. During the day he drove his boss around, and in the evenings he used a lorry to deliver materials to the sites. He did what he could to raise more money for the baby's birth. "Our baby should have everything we need and more," Jason said as he hugged Sandra after work. She felt sorry for her husband, seeing how tired he was. But what could she do? He was right. They had no one to help them. They had to do everything on their own. And it's not easy. Then came the long-awaited maternity leave. Sandra felt not very well and was glad to be able to at least a little rest before the appearance of her beloved daughter. The ultrasound had already shown that it would be a girl. The couple have even decided on a name. Jason said he wanted to name his daughter Emily. Sandra didn't mind. She liked the name too warm, so sweet. It was a late September evening. There was no sign of trouble. Jason had gone to his part-time job moving furniture from one town to another. He was glad to be able to bring an extra penny into the house, which of course was not really extra at all. The weather was good, the motorway was quiet. Jason was an experienced driver, despite his young age. Sandra was often anxious when her husband made long-distance journeys. But that evening she was not anxious at all. Sandra was lying on the couch with her laptop and picking out things for the baby girl to wear for her discharge. Yes, it's still a couple of months away. But while the parcel will be delivered, a lot of time will pass, she thought with a smile, looking at the tiny overalls and halters. Of course, the dresses were especially adorable. It turns out that even luxurious evening dresses are made for newborns. It was so nice to imagine my little girl in these clothes. I wonder who little Emily will look like. We won't know until 2 months from now. Jason and I are both cute. Emily's going to be a beauty either way. But that's not even the point, as long as she's healthy, Sandra thought. And then the phone rang. Sandra immediately felt something. She didn't feel like picking up the phone. A call in the evening, and from an unfamiliar number, not good. But there was no way out. Sandra Lucas' voice sounded excited. She recognized him immediately. It was Jason's partner, his colleague. It was Jason's partner, his colleague. Jason has crashed, the man's tone was worried. How? Sandra exhaled. She felt a sudden twinge in her stomach. He lost control on the motorway and went into a ditch. They took him to the regional hospital. Is he alive at least? I don't know anything. It was a terrible accident. I happened to be passing by, saw a familiar lorry, and then it happened right in front of me. Go to the regional hospital or call and find out. They took him there. I had time to ask the doctors. Sandra, having hastily changed her clothes, ran out of the house. The blood pounded in her temples, her legs shook, her heart clenched with an icy hand from anxiety. Just so long as I'm alive, just so long as I'm alive, she whispered without noticing it. Without thinking of safety, she stopped a hitchhiker. There was a guy behind the wheel. He looked anxiously at the pregnant young woman with terror-crazed eyes. Do you need help? He asked sympathetically. Is it time to go to the maternity hospital? No, to the regional hospital, Sandra asked. Will you bring me? Yes, of course. The young man did not ask unnecessary questions, and he did not take any money for the journey either. It was obvious that the guy sympathized and empathized with the passenger, but he didn't want to pry into her soul. However, he asked her a couple of times if she needed help. Sandra said no. How could this young man help her? The young man drove her to the gate of the regional hospital, wished her good luck and left. And Sandra rushed to the registrar's office to find out, finally, where her husband was and what happened to him. For a long time, she had to run between the buildings of a large regional hospital. No one knew anything. She was redirected from one department to another. Sandra was exhausted until she finally found the information she needed. Jason Brown, he's being operated on right now, the receptionist said, checking the notes in a thick notebook. He came in a few hours ago in a serious condition. Sandra exhaled with relief. Being in a serious condition. But he's alive. So the doctors got him to the hospital in time. It's in the hands of the surgeons now. What about him? What kind of injuries? She asked. And what are you, in fact, his wife? Yes, Sandra answered and mentally reproached herself for not having thought to bring her passport. but she had run out of the house in such a state that she had no time for that. Luckily, no documents were needed. The receptionist took her word for it. Wait for the operation to be completed. The surgeon will contact you afterwards. Just leave your phone number. Can I wait here? What's the point? The surgery could go on for hours. It's late. Go home. In your condition, you need to rest. There's nothing you can do for your husband here anyway. And yet Sandra stayed at the hospital until the end of the operation. She sat on the couch at the door of the surgical ward, praying to herself. She'd never done it before and didn't even think she knew how. Now the words themselves were popping up from somewhere in her subconscious. Leszka must survive. He just has to. How will she be without him, Sandra thought. The girl from the reception came up to her several times, brought her water, biscuits. At first she seemed so strict, so indifferent, but then she showed herself a sensitive and attentive person. She looked at Sandra with regret and said encouraging words. Even gave her a hug or two. This support made it a little easier. The operation took a long time. It ended in the morning. Sandra could not sleep a wink. How can you sleep when your heart is clenched with fear for the person you love? Finally, a tired surgeon came out into the corridor. Sandra, dying of fear, carefully looked at his face, trying to understand what news he was going to tell her. The injuries are serious, said the surgeon. We had to fight for the life of your husband. Pulled him, you might say, from the other side of the world. Now everything depends on the organism will cope or not. In any case, a few days will be critical. If he survives, he will have a long and difficult recovery. Sandra nodded her head. At that moment, she was not thinking about the difficulties ahead. The most important thing was that Jason survived. The surgeon was giving details of his injuries. His situation was very difficult indeed. What was he doing here? The doctor sighed sadly at the end of his monologue. He was so strong, handsome, strong. Now at best he will become an invalid, and that is if he survives. Oh, young people, you don't think with your heads. Sandra sighed. You can't explain to this man in a nutshell that Jason worked hard for their child, working multiple shifts, grabbing any part-time job he could get. He's got himself in a bind. Jason lost his guard on the motorway because he was tired. That's why he went into that ditch. Sandra stepped out onto the hospital porch after dawn. She hailed a taxi. At least she hadn't left her phone at home, although she could have in her condition. Then the phone vibrated again. Who would be calling this early? The man Jason worked for last night. I know what happened, he said. I understand your husband is in the hospital now? He's alive, I'm told. That's good. But you understand me too, said the man on the other end of the line. My lorry is beyond repair. The furniture is broken too. According to the contract, your husband is fully financially responsible, so please reimburse me for this damage. Even if not at once, even in installments, but... Yes, of course, Sandra whispered into the receiver and pressed the reset button. Only now she thought of other problems, money. Jason was the main earner in their family. He paid the rent and bought groceries. Sandra's income was barely enough to make ends meet. Everything else was on Jason's strong and reliable shoulders. So what now? Disaster. Where's the money for food and rent? I'll probably need medication too. Jason will need to be treated, rehabilitated. Where are we going to get the money? The debt on the lorry, the furniture, it must be a fortune. What about them? They don't even have anything to sell. And Emily will be born soon enough. Tears spurted from Sandra's eyes. She sank helplessly to the steps of the hospital porch. And then, immediately a searing pain pierced her stomach, so much so that Sandra's eyes went black. Then it seemed to go away, but a moment later it happened again. Sandra wrapped her arms around her stomach and froze on the porch. The pain came in waves. Sandra could no longer think about Jason or the money problems that their family was facing. Nothing mattered as long as the infernal pain went away. Sandra called for help with all her might. People in white coats, a gurney, the bright light of the lamp in the operating theater. Sandra was asked some questions. She answered, sometimes clearly out of order. Then someone put a mask over her face and asked her to count from 10 to 1. Sandra concentrated and started counting. Soon there was blissful darkness and calmness came. Sandra felt she was floating in something soft and gentle. Most importantly, the excruciating pain was gone. No thoughts, no worries, no fears. Just peace and quiet. Sandra was even a little upset when she opened her eyes and found herself in a bright hospital room. Her mouth was terribly dry, her tongue felt like it was glued to her palate. An unpleasant sensation. Sandra was lying under an IV. Some wires were attached to her chest. The girl felt a strange lightness in her whole body. She grabbed her stomach. There was no stomach. How is this possible? Sandra had a cold sweat on her forehead from fear and anxiety. "Hello, anyone?" Sandra shouted with all her might, but her voice sounded quiet, barely audible. The patient was noticed, though. A woman in a white coat, either a doctor or a nurse, entered the room at her call. "Where is my baby?" Sandra asked the question on the answer to which her whole life depended. She had never felt such fear before. "Your baby girl is in the room for premature babies. She's alive." A hospital employee rushed to reassure the patient. "You went into premature labor out of nervousness. It's good that you were in the hospital at the time. You got help quickly." "Is she alive?" Sandra checked again. "Yes, she's alive. She's a good girl, strong, but she has to be raised in a hospital setting. She was premature. I've seen a lot of babies like that. This one's going to be fine. No, she's going to need rehab, of course, not without it. But the baby's not critical. Don't worry." Sandra nodded her head gratefully. The main thing was that Emily was alive. The young mother immediately believed the words of the woman in the white coat. Her daughter was really going to be all right. Ironically, the woman who later helped Sandra with the pram also had a baby that day. Also premature. But unlike Sandra, she had heard a very different prognosis from the doctors. Her baby was given no chance. Can I see my daughter?" "That's for later. You're too weak yourself right now. You've lost a lot of blood. And anyway, we all know what happened to your husband. Of course you're nervous about having a premature birth." "And my husband? Do you know if there's any news about him?" "I know he's alive in intensive care. That's all I know." An anxious days flowed, filled with fear for her daughter and husband. Injections, pills, painful procedures. Sandra felt her strength returning. That was a good thing, because she would need her strength. She will now have a disabled husband and a newborn daughter who requires intensive care due to prematurity. After all, money problems have not canceled. Can Sandra cope with all this alone? The nursing staff, knowing the story of the young mum, tried to support her in any way they could. They told her every day about Jason's condition. The man had already been moved out of intensive care. He even started to move his arms to speak and learned to sit up. But walking was much worse. All indications were that Jason would never get out of his wheelchair. Emily. Things were really good. She was growing, getting stronger, and most importantly, gaining weight. Sandra was taken to see her daughter on the third day after the baby girl was born. Emily lay in her cot, so small, so defenseless. Her tiny body was tangled with wires. And yet, compared to her peers, the girl looked the strongest. There were also babies who were born much earlier than they should have been. Emily was still 7 months in the womb. Sandra was soon released from the hospital, but the woman still came here every day to visit Emily and Jason and check on their condition with the doctors. Jason fought bravely. It hurt to see a young and once strong husband in a wheelchair. But he assured that he would get well soon and take up his work with renewed vigor. Because no more sickness and idleness, he looked at Emily's photos with a snowy smile. "I can't wait to get back on my feet and see my daughter. I'll carry her around the park on my shoulders and learn to braid her hair." Sandra smiled sadly. From what the doctor had told her, Jason was unlikely to get up. There was a chance, but it would take a lot of money to rehabilitate him. Where was that going to come from? Thank the doctors so much, she thought. They'd help Jason get disability quickly, which meant Social Security benefits and at least some free medical care. But all of that was not enough for Jason's full recovery. And then the owner of the truck called every day demanding money. Sandra even had to go back to work. Now she cleaned the entrances in the mornings and evenings. It was money, no matter what. She had plenty of time for now. Emily was in the hospital. Another month or so passed, and then Jason was released from the hospital. He came home in a wheelchair. It's a good thing they had ramps in their driveway, but it was inconvenient enough. Yes, it was hard for Jason to get used to his new situation, but he was not discouraged and supported Sandra, and he looked for a job, surfing the internet in search of income for people who couldn't walk. There were very few jobs. And then, finally, Emily was discharged. The joy of the young parents was unrivaled, despite the seemingly hopeless situation. Jason quickly learned how to manipulate the baby to bathe, feed, and change nappies. Seeing that the young father was doing quite well, Sandra decided to go to work. "We don't have enough money, and you can still cope with the baby at home. I'll go back to the canteen. There's no other way out." Jason had to agree. I could see for myself that it was very hard on him. He'd been the main breadwinner for so long, and now he was sitting on his wife's neck. But the young family really had no choice. They had to pay the rent, pay for food, pay off debt. The money that Jason had been saving for a couple of years for a future place to live had gone at a cosmic speed. Some of it went to medication, some of it to pay off the cost of the truck. It was a tough time. Sandra was at work 24 hours a day, working double shifts. Jason was doing the best he could at home. It wasn't easy for him either. Emily was growing up sickly, the effects of prematurity. She needed medicines, expensive vitamins, endless consultations and specialist examinations. Sandra was struggling. Jason, too, looked exhausted. He took part-time jobs earning pennies, but he couldn't do nothing either. Emily was all over him. Only the head of the family, Jason, didn't think it was enough. And still the money was woefully inadequate. Even a pram for Emily was not enough to buy, and she needed it to take her to the clinic. One evening, Sandra was coming home from work. Her back was already aching and her legs were buzzing with fatigue. Heavy thoughts were swarming in her head. This was not how Sandra had imagined married life. In her dreams, she saw herself strolling through the park with a pram and a smart baby in it. Sandra often looked at such young mothers. They are walking calm, peaceful, happy, and do not even realize how lucky they are. They are lucky that they can walk freely with their babies and devote all their time to them. Emily doesn't even have a pram. Suddenly, Sandra's attention was caught by a woman walking towards her with a lovely coffee-colored pram. Comfortable, maneuverable, obviously very expensive and high quality. Sandra had seen them in children's shops. They cost a fortune. Sandra gave the woman a habitual glance. Something about the stranger caught her eye. So stylish, well-groomed. Old, of course. But nowadays many people have their first child, especially the rich. It's fashionable. But why is this woman so sad? Maybe something happened in her life. Something terrible must have happened to her. There's no other way to explain that look in her eyes. After all, she seems to be doing well. She's so beautiful. She's rolling an expensive pram in front of her. There's probably a baby in it, dressed in brand-name clothes. The woman rolled the pram up to a car park with rubbish bins. The rubbish hadn't been emptied for a long time. A sort of spontaneous dump had formed here. Sandra thought that maybe the woman would throw the bag of rubbish away and move on. But the stranger did otherwise. She sighed, rocked the pram a few times, and walked away. With a quick step, the woman walked behind the house somewhere far away, and the pram stayed where it was. Sandra, not believing her eyes, hurried to the rubbish bins. The first thing she did was look in the pram. There was no one there. Sandra exhaled. She had already decided that some crazy person had thrown the baby into a rubbish bin. Such cases are sometimes described on the internet. But the pram, fortunately, turned out to be empty. Why would a stranger leave it here? She probably threw it away. People sometimes leave good things near the rubbish for people in need to pick up. Like this woman, her baby must be all grown up by now. So she got rid of her now unwanted pram. Yes, that was the most reasonable explanation. But Sandra tried not to rejoice just yet. What if the woman comes back now? What if she just left the pram here while she went to run errands or fetch the baby? Strange choice of location, sure, but I don't know. Half an hour passed. The woman still hadn't turned up. Sandra had been watching the pram all this time, because what if someone else took it? A thing like that wouldn't stay near the rubbish bins. And they need the pram so much for Emily, it's a must. In the end, Sandra is sure that the owner does not need the pram and calmly rolls it to her house. Jason even whistled in amazement when he saw it. This is how Emily is transported. And what a luxury vehicle it is. I'm surprised myself, Sandra smiled. The woman left it on the rubbish bin right in front of me and walked away. I was still waiting a long time, in case she came back. But no, she didn't come back. It's strange. Such a beautiful pram, obviously expensive. I could have sold it. I'd make a lot of money. It's in perfect condition, like new, Sandra agreed. Strange, like new indeed, Jason shook his head, examining the tires carefully. Oh well, you can't understand them rich people. Jason volunteered to wash the pram himself, which was why he had discovered the very letter. A piece of paper folded in half was in the side pocket of the pram. It was a whole message. Come here, Jason called to his wife. She was playing with Emily at that moment. It's just I can't believe it. Read it, Jason held out the sheet to his wife. Where did you get this? It was lying in the pram. I don't even know how to respond to it. It's a terrific letter. Sandra took the piece of paper from her husband's hands and began to read. Beautiful, almost calligraphic handwriting, easy to read. It was clearly written by a very literate person. What's the point? Yeah, Jason's right. It's a pretty unbelievable story. Hello, people who found this letter, the message began. If you're reading this, it means the pram has finally met its little master or mistress. That's just wonderful. My name is Tiffany. I decided to leave the pram near the bins so that it could go to people in need, people with a baby who don't have any money for baby transport. May the pram last a long time and help you raise your child. Of course, you are people with low income, perhaps even living on the edge of poverty. There are all sorts of situations. Why am I so sure of that? Simply because it's unlikely that someone from a wealthy family would pick up a pram in a landfill. Such people prepare for the arrival of a child in advance, make lists, choose things in children's shops. I was just as happy a while ago. But you're happier than I am, because you have the main thing, your child, your son or daughter. It is happiness to be parents, to see your baby growing, to give him love, to introduce him to the world. I don't know what could be better than that. Probably nothing, so you're much happier than I am. You're going through a hard time right now, but I'm sure you'll get through it. You'll be fine in the end. Let this wheelchair be a help to you on your start to success. It's like she's describing, as Sandra said in amazement as she looked at Jason. Exactly, agreed her husband. That's what's so amazing about it. But go ahead and read on. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, especially at the end. Sandra delved into the reading again. My life has been a fairy tale in which all my wishes have come true. Since I was a child, I have never been denied anything. My father is a successful businessman, my mother a successful financier. I was the only granddaughter of my mom and dad's grandparents. You can imagine how they spoiled me. How much love, care, and attention I received. They invested a lot in me, and I knew that the moment would come and I would pass it all on to my children. Since I was little, I dreamed of a big family, and in games with my girlfriends, I always took on the role of a mother with many children. Since childhood, I heard from everyone that I will be a great mother when the time comes. So I grew up with that thought. And then I grew up. It turned out that life is very bright, diverse, interesting. We traveled a lot with my parents, with friends. It's something completely different. In general, I had a happy student life. I had time to live abroad and visit different parts of the world. I had adventures. As they say, it will be something to remember in my old age. It was a very cheerful period of my life, bright, full of events. And then I got interested in playing on the stock exchange. Somehow it happened that I became a successful broker, though I never aspired to it. I thought I would get married and have children, as I dreamed. Someday I would start a family. But I didn't. Work took me over completely. The excitement, the success, the recognition of reputable financiers. I was invited to conduct seminars in major business centers. Business sharks listened to my words. It all made my head spin. I didn't notice how my priorities changed. Of course, sometimes I thought that it was time to get married and become a mom. Time is running out. But on the one hand, I was still young. On the other hand, there was no one I saw as my spouse. Maybe those were just excuses, because I was happy with the life I was leading. Because when I looked at my friends who were mired in childish affairs and problems, I rejoiced in my freedom. The once cheerful and energetic girls had turned into haggard women. They only talked about children and their skills. It made me sad. I felt like a queen. Successful, respected, indispensable. Famous economists sought my advice, magazines wrote about me. It's a feeling I can't describe. This glitter and tinsel overshadowed for me my main desire. I always wanted to have children. I wanted to take care of babies, to teach them something, to love them. But at that time, for some reason, I decided that motherhood is the fate of lazy, limited housewives. I even condemned women who were completely immersed in children, considered them too down to earth, not capable of anything but childbearing. I almost stopped talking to my family friends. Their children annoyed me. I don't know how it happened. What are you, a child-free? Lingered a question that one of my acquaintances once asked me. She had recently given birth to a son and could think of nothing but her child. I wondered. No, not a child-free person. It's just that at that time I didn't want to burden myself with all this. I mean, it's nice not to have to depend on anyone, to be free and easy. I wanted to go to the seaside with friends. I wanted to go clubbing or shopping. I wanted to start a new romance and plunge headlong into a beautiful relationship. It seemed to me that I would still have time to become a mother sometime in the future, after many years. For now, my life was bright and exciting as it was. And then somehow I got bored with it all. Work, risk, superficial novels, clubs, drinking, dancing, even traveling. I wanted a family warmth, a reliable person next to me. I guess the time had come. True, I was already 35 at the time. I remembered my old dream of becoming a mother of many children. Now I looked at my married friends not with contempt and regret, but almost with envy. I too wanted it all. Husband, children, family. Then came the realization that work and recognition will not replace the warmth of loved ones. Even tears came to my eyes at these thoughts. I grew up, I guess. And that's when I met Scott. A chance meeting at a coffee shop where we both had breakfast before work. We had what they call a spark. We looked at each other at first. Then he came over. Young lady, Scott said, "I can't take my eyes off you. You're incredibly beautiful, and your eyes are so amazing. I can see in them that you are a very kind, caring person." It was nice to receive such an exquisite compliment, especially from a man you liked at first sight. But I hastened to disappoint him. "You are not a very good judge of character," I said. "You don't know me at all, and you thought I was kind and good. I'm not." "You don't seem to know yourself very well," Scott smiled. "I'm a good judge of character, and I'm never wrong. You'll find that out." Then we got to talking. I was immediately interested in Scott. He was so smart, so perceptive, and most importantly, he looked at me with admiration and tenderness. That's how our relationship began. 6 months later, we were already celebrating a lavish wedding. He turned out to be the owner of a small dairy. What won me over most of all was his sense of humor. And a caring mother, of course. He finally made me feel like a woman in the full sense of the word. It turns out that it is very pleasant when you are looked after, when you are protected. Of course, we did not put off the question of heirs, as both of us were already at the age when it was time to become parents. Turns out he dreams of a large family, just as I once did around Scott. That childhood dream of mine came alive again. I realized that more than anything I wanted to be a mom, and as soon as possible. And that's when I found out it wasn't that simple. I couldn't get pregnant. For the first time in my life, I couldn't get what I wanted. It was discouraging. Scott told me not to worry. He told me about people he knew who hadn't become parents right away. But it didn't make me feel any better. I snapped at my husband, even though I loved him very much. He patiently endured all my tantrums. I still don't understand where he got so much strength. After a while, we went to the doctors. At first, they couldn't make a diagnosis for a long time. Scott and I were given a full examination. There were no problems with money, so we visited the most famous doctors both in our country and abroad. After a while, the doctors found the cause of the problem. It turned out that there was a subtle genetic breakdown in my health, which was almost impossible to detect. But also how to correct the situation, the doctors had no idea. If I had decided on motherhood earlier, everything would have worked out. But the years in my case played against me. I was immediately warned that the chances were practically nil, and then I enthusiastically joined the fight. I was not used to giving up and losing in anything. I took the doctor's words as a challenge. And again, treatment, examinations, endless analyses and procedures. I stopped working. I no longer enjoyed anything at all. I had a goal, and I was on my way to it. How can that be? My dream, and suddenly it doesn't come true. I just couldn't get my head around that. There was a period when I began to hate women with small children and pregnant women, just because I was so jealous of them. Why did they get it and I didn't? It's so unfair. Why are they better than me? I'd have been a much better mother. Cattle was so patient with me. He comforted me, supported me. My husband said many times that all he wanted was for me to come back the same old me, cheerful, kind, cheerful. I miss my Tiffany incredibly. It's been so long since I've been in touch with this intelligent, sensitive woman. Go find that woman, I replied resentfully. If your wife doesn't suit you anymore, why are you doing this? Scott sighed and hugged me. I just miss our old life. I'd love to help him, but I'm so fixated on what's unattainable for me. I've lost my mind. Let's adopt a baby, Scott urged. There are so many kids in orphanages who need parents. They've been betrayed from birth, abandoned and forsaken. We have a lot of opportunities. We'll give that child or those children everything they need to be happy. Think about it. Just think about it. He even showed me pictures of orphans from orphanages. Big-eyed babies, touching, defenseless, so in need of loving and caring adults by their side. But I didn't want to hear anything. I needed my own blood child. What do I need other people's children for? Their parents don't even want them. So what do we need them for? Imagine whose offspring end up in an orphanage. Lazy, alcoholics, don't be daft. We'll work it out in the end. But nothing worked out. Doctors were throwing up their hands and saying more and more often that genetic diagnoses were very difficult to work with. Treatment became more and more expensive and more difficult. The outlook was increasingly dim. I spent 5 years trying to have a baby. It was a very difficult time. There was hope and disappointment all over the place. I lived in anxiety, then in the pain of another failure. The cattle. How did he have so much patience? He was always there to support me, even though I was acting crazy. From time to time, my husband talked about having a foster baby, but I didn't want to hear anything. It was as if his persuasion spurred me on. Now, I also wanted to prove him wrong. We're having our own baby. Because I said so. He's offering me some nonsense. I've tried everything. I've tried innovative methods. I've tried folk medicine. I even went to a healer. The shaman was running around me, shouting strange words. I smoked all over the room. I smoked everything. But even then, I thought I was doing the right thing. Knocking on every door, taking every chance. Temporary blackout, no other way to put it. Scott looked at me with regret and concern. He was afraid for my condition, because I didn't look like myself at all. And then, finally, a miracle. One May morning, I learned that I was expecting a child. I was overjoyed. I even fainted from the abundance of emotions. I looked at the positive test and my legs were shaking. Finally. How I wanted at that moment to speed up time, to make this happy event come sooner. My long-awaited baby boy was born. There were still months ahead, but I already felt like his mother. The doctors were surprised at the time. According to them, there was no hope. But my case turned out to be a miracle. I naively believed that everything worked out because my desire was so strong and it changed the world and the order of things in it. And then I found myself almost omnipotent. The cattle, of course, were very happy too. I felt a kind of superiority over him. How he'd been going on and on about foster children. He had tried to reconcile me to our situation, and in the end, he was wrong. I was happy about that too. It's embarrassing to write that now. Readers, forgive me for describing everything in such detail here now. It is necessary, perhaps, to speak out. I want someone to know about my fate, to understand my feelings. Yes, read all the way to the end. Look, there's something very interesting and important waiting for you. I really want to help you and your baby, not only financially, but also with advice. My life. Make the right conclusions and do not repeat my mistakes. Appreciate what you have. Pregnancy was difficult from the very beginning. Constant threats of miscarriage. I didn't leave the hospital for months, sometimes weeks. I was lying in bed, not getting out of bed at all, taking care of my baby. My health was deteriorating sharply. Doctors offered me to get rid of the pregnancy because the analyses said that the body could not cope with the load. My life was in danger. After all, I had a serious diagnosis that I could not give birth to. I didn't want to listen to anything. I had to dream of pregnancy for so long, waiting for this moment for so long, and suddenly giving up on a lined-up baby. No way. You are doctors and you are paid a lot of money to do your job, I shouted at the nursing staff. Then do it properly. It's only a few months away. It's the 21st century. Is medicine so powerless these days? My doctors used to say. Yes, you're right, doctors are gods. Are you suffering? The child suffers. The consequences could be catastrophic. There are no guarantees. You have to understand that. But I didn't want to hear any of it. By then I already knew I was carrying my son. I'd even dreamt about him many times. For the sake of this baby, I was ready to endure any pain and to lie in hospital, even for the whole 9 months. I needed a child, and that was it. The fact that the baby suffered in the womb, not adapted for carrying children, I did not even think about it. That's how selfish I was back then. Cattle, seeing that I could not change my mind, was there for me and just supported me. He didn't argue anymore, so as not to make me nervous. He agreed with everything, held my hand, reassured me, bought all the necessary drugs, talked to the doctors. Just a hug when I needed it. I was getting worse. I hoped that the baby was suffering less, but according to the ultrasound, it was also very, very bad. I was so scared for my baby boy. He was the meaning of my life. I was talking to my son, asking him to hang in there to distract myself somehow. I was surfing baby stuff websites, looking at prams, choosing clothes for my boy. It was such a pleasant hassle. We had parcels coming home to us, lots and lots of them. Looking at these things, I thought about good things, because, well, here they are, the proof that Scott and I are almost parents. There's so much baby stuff in the house, we just have to wait for their little owner. He's going to be the happiest baby in the world. And the difficulties will be forgotten like a bad dream. The boy was born much prematurely. The doctor's manipulations didn't help. The organism decided to get rid of what was destroying my health and harming me. The baby turned out to be weak, sickly. I saw his thin arms and legs, some strange, bright skin color. My heart sank with pity and tenderness. Only looking at my son wrapped in wires, I realized that I was a complete egoist. The doctors had warned me this would happen. And now I'm much better. My health is recovering rapidly. The child is bad. He is all alone in the intensive care unit, fighting for his life. The doctors said right away that there was little hope. Congenital abnormalities, general weakness of the baby due to the fact that my pregnancy was hard. But I still believed in a miracle. I even threatened the doctors that if anything, they would retaliate. Of course, that didn't help. My son struggled for a few days, then gave up after all. When they told me that, my world turned upside down. I was so angry at everyone, blaming the doctors, even Scott. He, in my opinion, didn't have enough faith in the happy outcome, and therefore was to blame too. It got to the point where Scott put me in a clinic. Padded room, helpful staff. Talking to a therapist. Silence, rest, medication. I began to slowly come round, rethink things and realize things. I realized what had happened. Selfish people are fixated on what they want. I realized how badly I'd behaved towards Scott. I thought about the future. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I realized that I needed to channel my energy not into anger and hatred, but into creation. That's when the conversation with my husband came back to my mind. Scott was right. There are so many underprivileged children in the world. You have to help them. You have to support them. Just because you don't have a baby of your own doesn't mean you have no one to give your unsold love and care to. I returned home a different person. The cattle were the most excited about it. He said he missed the old Tiffany so much, and now she's back with him. It was really nice. Things that reminded me of the tragedy that had happened to us, which I had bought in myriad ways: clothes, toys, furniture. Cattle put them in a separate room, a kind of warehouse or museum. These things, looking at them, still pained me deeply. "Let's throw it away," I said to my husband. "Why? Wouldn't it be better to give them away to the needy?" he wondered. The cattle, as always, were right. I started traveling to shelters with boxes and bags. There I got acquainted with the staff, learnt the stories of the children. Lots and lots of stories, complicated fates, tragedies, betrayals. Someday, when I have more time, I will write a book about it. People need to know this. It fascinated me. I wanted to help underprivileged kids, to make their lives a little better. And I could. I had all the opportunities, and now I think to organize my own charitable foundation. It's a lot of work, but I can do it. I've already started to learn a little bit about how to set it up. In the meantime, I help kids from orphanages, buying things they need and organizing holidays. I am so happy to see smiles on the faces of these boys and girls. Some time past, it seemed to me that I gave away all the things that I bought for my son, but one day I came across this pram. I remembered how carefully I chose it, studied the features, looked at the appearance. I wanted my son to be comfortable in it. But unfortunately, he never had time to try it out. The pram was stored in the basement. That's why Scott and I had forgotten about it. He tensed up when I noticed the thing, thinking I was going to get hurt again. But strangely enough, all I felt was a slight sadness. Regret, because I already had meaning in my life again. And I knew that my baby, what had happened to him, it wasn't all for nothing. Now, in honor of my son, I will help many other children. Our boy didn't live long, but his short life will make a huge difference in this world. But what about the pram? I had a very interesting idea about it. Orphanages where children have a hard life. Everyone knows about it. They often talk about it, but at least they are provided for, always fed and clothed. They lack parental love and care. At the same time, they are fully provided for financially. But there is another category of children. Their parents earn pennies and cannot buy them even the most necessary things. How many such families do we have? Usually nobody helps them. There are mom and dad, let them raise their heirs. That's what most people think. But there are different situations. Not only lazy and irresponsible people get into difficult situations. I decided to leave this pram where it will be found by people who need it badly. Usually good things that are no longer needed are left near the rubbish. That's what I did with the pram. Thank you for reading this story to the end. I hope my letter eventually found the right recipient. I believe it did. You must be desperate right now. You don't have enough money to live on. You don't see a future. So I want to help you with something else. Not far from the rubbish bins where you found the pram, there's an unfinished shop building, an abandoned property. I left something else under the porch there for you. I hope it will help you get your life together and raise your baby to be a decent human being. Good luck with everything. Tiffany. Sandra set the sheet aside in confusion and looked at Jason. "Do you think this is all true?" she asked Jason. "You mean about something waiting for us under the porch of the unfinished building? And about that, too. And about the whole thing in general," she clarified. "I don't know what to think," Jason shrugged. "But I'm definitely going to look under the porch right now. I don't feel like waiting until morning." The young parents put Emily to bed. They waited until she was snoring sweetly in her cot before they went outside. They were not worried about their daughter. They knew that she now sleeps at least 4 hours in a row, and they do not need so much time. The unfinished building was very close. They could do it in 20 minutes. "This is the place," Jason said as he wheeled his buggy up to the porch of the unfinished shop. He bent down and started fumbling under the porch with his hands. Sandra was standing nearby, afraid of something. She looked around, wondering if this was some kind of prank or worse. What if they were being set up? What if right now there was someone watching them from around the corner? "Look," Jason exclaimed, pulling out a small roll frozen in cellophane. The boy immediately tore open the wrapping and whistled in surprise. Sandra looked at what he was holding out to her. It was a thick wad of note slots and lots of money. Sandra even pinched her hand to make sure it wasn't a dream. There was a fortune in here. Maybe not, the girl doubted. "Yeah, no, it looks like the real thing," Jason said, examining the notes closely. "So everything in this letter is true from the first to the last word. Unbelievable." Sandra still couldn't believe it, couldn't believe that strangers had saved their family from imminent disaster. But that's how it turned out in the end. The money was enough to rehabilitate Jason. The young man was quickly put back on his feet in a paid medical center. Now he could work again. It's true what they say: if you want to make a man happy, first take something away from him, and then give it back. Jason rejoiced. He was walking at last. It took a long time to learn how to do it. It didn't all work at once. Daddy and daughter took their first steps together. One from the moment of birth, the other after the accident. The young people also had enough to buy their own flat. A small 2-bedroom in an unprestigious area of the city, but it was their own cozy, native, beloved. With what pleasure the young made repairs in their nest and arranged it. Yes, the money found under the porch was enough for the new place. Jason was working again, so the family was no longer in poverty. Sandra was able to finish her maternity leave in peace. Now she didn't have to work from dawn to dusk in the canteen. What a blessing it was to watch your child grow up, to introduce him to the world, to devote time to him without thinking about how to survive. Jason paid off his debt to his former employer and found a new job. Now he wasn't working multiple shifts and was much more careful and cautious than before. Life was getting better. One day Sandra was walking in the park with her pram, the same lovely coffee-colored pram. It was designed to be converted into a seated vehicle. In the pram, Emily, wearing a light white dress and a smart hat, wiggled her legs and looked at the world in wonder. She looked like a doll. And Sandra suddenly caught herself thinking that she was now that happy young mother, one of those she had once envied so much. And it was all thanks to Tiffany. A woman who had survived a tragedy, but had managed to overcome herself and find her true calling. Tiffany is probably now helping other orphans and poor children. It's wonderful that there are people like that in the world. As the years passed, Jason and Sandra worked, raising Emily. They weren't poor anymore, just an ordinary, middle-class family. Even managed to get away to the seaside once in a while, all thanks to the occasional help from complete strangers. Sandra tried to look for Tiffany, scouring the internet, looking at many pages on social networks. Why? But just wanted to say to the person who had done so much for their family's future, thank you, just a simple thank you. Let Tiffany know that her pram and money really did save an entire family. It would probably make her feel good. But Sandra soon realized that Tiffany apparently lived in a different town altogether, because no one supervised the local shelters. And there was no children's aid fund in their town either. Some kind of fairy, Jason said. He, too, wanted to find their savior. She'd come out of nowhere at a difficult moment, and then vanished without a trace. It's mystical, our guardian angel, that's what it is. Years passed. Emily grew up to be a pretty girl. She always got excellent grades. Her parents were proud of their daughter and very much hoped that she, unlike them, will definitely be able to get a good education. They both encouraged Emily to go to university. The girl herself was not against it. Since the 3rd grade, she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Of course, Emily knew the story of the pram. Her parents told their daughter about it when she was about 5 years old. Every day, Sandra remembered the woman who had left the expensive new pram near the rubbish bin. Her face was clearly etched in Sandra's memory. It was Tiffany, about whom she had just read the article. This was the amazing fairy who had helped their family out of poverty. Doubts, of course, still remained. So Sandra started looking for information about the accidental savior. She wanted to know for sure. There were plenty of articles on the internet about this woman. Her foundation had done a great job. 1,000 children had received great support over the years. Tiffany didn't just help children. She attracted the powerful to the cause. Famous actors, businessmen, they all participated. Tiffany repeatedly emphasized in interviews that she could never have done it alone. The world is not without kind people, she told a journalist with a smile. There are far more kind people than indifferent and callous ones. I know that for a fact now. Tiffany looked happy, full of vigor, content with life. Her shining eyes had nothing in common with the wan look of the woman Sandra remembered. It was understandable back then Tiffany, if that was her, was going through a tragedy. Now the woman had found herself and was dealing with an important and very responsible matter. Should I write her or not? Sandra said aloud. Too bad Jason is away on a business trip. I'd like to consult with him now. Sandra was used to discussing all important matters with her husband. The woman decided to find out a little more about Tiffany to see if it was worth bothering such a busy man. Tiffany had a busy and colorful life. She traveled extensively both across the country and around the world. Almost always with her were her foster children, now teenagers. So different from each other. What would their fate have been if they had stayed in the orphanage? And then Sandra came across an article that shattered all her doubts, because this interview was about her too, about Sandra. It was a long article with lots of pictures. Tiffany answered the questions thoroughly without skimming over the details. Where did it all start? A reporter asked. How did you decide that your calling was to help underprivileged children? As I said earlier, it all started after Scott and I lost our son, a long-awaited, long-suffering child, Tiffany replied. We had been preparing for his arrival. We had so much stuff left over. I thought that these toys, nappies, cradles could be of use to someone. Our son is gone, but we can't let all this stuff go to waste. We delivered bags and boxes to shelters. It is so logical to give unwanted children's things to orphanages. They will always be useful there. Then, when I thought that I had already got rid of all the things, I saw the very pram that I had so carefully chosen for my child. It was painful, I'll admit it. But by that time, I had learned to cope with my emotions and decided that I had to help some needy family, people who had a baby, but no money for new things for the baby. I had to find a special family. Any family would not suit me. For this purpose, I even traveled to neighboring towns, looking around. I thought I was abnormal myself, but still I continued this strange occupation. Perhaps the tragedy then confused my mind. Anyway, I have no regrets. Then one day I saw a sad girl. There was so much anxiety in her eyes. Visually, it was noticeable how the fragile shoulders of the girl were pressed with a heavy weight of problems. She was walking through the park next to a guy who was traveling in a wheelchair. It was probably her husband. The girl was holding a tiny infant in her arms, cradling the baby in her arms, and it was so beautiful. But she didn't seem to realize it. There was despair in her eyes. The young man in the wheelchair was cheerful, even smiling. But I could see he was on the edge too. I followed this family. I was very attracted to them. I walked a little behind them and listened to their conversation. The guy needed expensive treatment. As I understood, something had happened to him not so long ago, and he had moved into a wheelchair and lost his income. The girl worked tirelessly at a hard job. The child, as much as he could, was taken care of by her husband, himself a profound invalid. But most importantly, they talked about the wheelchair. Tiffany continued. About the wheelchair, the reporter interjected. Yes, about the wheelchair. That became a kind of sign for me. They dreamed of a pram for their baby. That way it would be easier for the man to take the infant to the clinic. And then something clicked in my head. I realized that this was the family I had to help. But a pram that was too little. These good kids couldn't climb out of poverty on their own. They needed help at the start, and I could give it to them. Not only could, but I wanted to, because, well, how could I not? I'm sure they did the right thing with the money. Money? The journalist didn't understand. Yes, I decided to give them not only the pram, but also an amount that should have been enough for the guy's treatment, and at least a small flat. But how to do it without arousing suspicion? I thought about it for a long time. And then the plan just sort of fell into place. Tiffany pulled herself away from the screen and smiled. Wow. She was now recognizing her story from the other side. It was so interesting, so fascinating and unusual. The woman pulled the very same letter out of the photo album. Of course, Sandra and Jason had kept the message. Tiffany had written it years ago. She so sincerely wanted to help a family in distress. I wrote the future owners of the pram a whole message on a sheet of paper on both sides. In it, I told them about my life, about the history of the pram. It was like psychotherapy for me. It was as if I was getting rid of, spilling out my pain and healing. At the end of the letter, I told this young couple where to look for money. I hoped that everything worked out well for them. I really wanted to know the fate of this family, and even went to that town on purpose, but I never met any of them in the park. Maybe they'd gone somewhere else, or did we just miss each other? "We're really doing fine," Sandra whispered directly into the monitor. "Thanks to you, we're really doing fine." But why didn't you just give them the money? The journalist didn't understand. I can't remember now. I was in such a strange state at the time. Perhaps I didn't want these people to get tense or scared. After all, my story is not simple, and the situation itself could seem suspicious. In any case, I wanted to remain a mysterious stranger for this family, a kind fairy. But it's almost a legendary story. I'm sure it will be passed down in that family from generation to generation, almost like a fairy tale. A fairy tale, Sandra smiled. It is. Emily thought for a long time that they were actually helped by a fairy. It turns out the meeting wasn't a coincidence. Tiffany knew in advance that the pram and the money would go to them, and yet there were plenty of happy coincidences in this story. After all, Tiffany had come to their town looking for the right family. It was to their town that she had met them in the park, following them around. Surely they must have attracted attention then. A strange trio, a young, confused woman, a tiny infant, and a guy in a wheelchair. Tiffany spotted them, followed them. She heard bits and pieces of conversation between the couple and was strengthened in her decision to help them. Sandra didn't think any further. She was already writing a message to Tiffany. It was long, almost like that memorable letter from the pram. Sandra told the woman her story of poverty in detail. She mentioned the despair of the car accident, the disability of the sole breadwinner, the birth of her premature daughter, the huge debts. Tiffany needs to know that her help really did save an entire family. At the end, Sandra wrote about her life today and even attached photos of her family, including one from a seaside holiday. "There are no words to express our gratitude," was how Sandra ended her letter. The woman reread the message again and pressed the send button.